Hey, what's going on, everybody? Welcome to episode 47 of the Farmer Action Guys podcast, and I'm your host, Justin Kramer. This week I have on my buddy Grant Mauritzson. He, call sign is Emilio. He's a Harrier pilot, or he was a Harrier pilot, did 12 years in the Marine Corps, did an Afghan pump, did a MEU pump. He and I deployed together on the MEU, so we catch up on some stuff there. And it's a really good conversation about flight school, the different avenues of training and stuff that people will go through in flight school, and what they can expect if that's something you're interested in, and just kind of the life of a Harrier pilot. And we kind of talk through CAS tactics and stuff like that close air support and everything like that. Before we get started on the episode, I do have a few reviews I want to read, some customer feedback, some listener feedback. So first off, thank you to everyone that's left a review. I'm up at 64 straight 5-star reviews on Apple Podcast. So I really appreciate that. That helps legitimize the show, and it tells people that, hey, this is a good show for them to check out. And that's great. So the first one is from Vortex Rex. It says, awesome podcast. For anyone that's ever served, I highly recommend this podcast. For anyone that's never served, I highly recommend this podcast. Love listening to true heroes tell their stories. Great job, Semper Fi. So thanks for that, Vortex Rex. We also had one from Birdman8584. Said, started listening after a friend was on the show. Since then, I've been listening to a few of the podcasts a week. Thanks to COVID-19 furloughs, I'm mostly working alone, so it's nice to have the show on in the background. I like hearing about the JTAC side of things from my perspective as a former O3. Yeah, no, dude, I love getting the word out. And I appreciate you checking out the show after one of your buddies was on. I'm not sure who it was, but shout out to them for coming on the show, and for you for sticking around. Hopefully you're spreading the word. Last one from Apple Podcasts is from someone living in Okie. I know a few people in Okie, so I don't know who this is from, but it says, Justin, it's great to see you doing well and doing this podcast. Like you said in a previous one, it's a great way to stay in touch with guys we have served with over the years. In addition, seeing what their lives are like out of the military and the knowledge they can provide to U.S. service members transitioning back to the civilian sector. Look forward to many more, and thank you for sharing. No, 100%. I'm glad to do it. I love doing it. I'm glad word is getting out on some of the opportunities and stuff, and some of the the issues and stuff that guys have when they get out. I think it's important, because if you are in the military right now and you're planning on EASing or ending your active service, if you're planning on getting out, then who are you going to go to? Who are you going to talk to about how it is to get out? Because no one in your command knows, because none of them have gotten out before. They don't know the process. They may know like what's supposed to happen, but the realities of getting out, and then the things that happen to you personally after you get out, like how to adjust to no longer being in the military, not being around maybe the same caliber people, not having the same kind of sense of purpose, and it's a big deal for veterans that get out. And I think that's one of our biggest issues on mental health. So any way I can get word out to people to help them understand what it's going to be like to get out, prepare themselves, and to just set themselves up for the future, it makes me super happy. And I get to tell all these people stories. All these people get to come on and tell their own stories, honestly. And we just hear about regular guys, regular Joes, regular people, not just guys. I have female on here too. But regular people that have signed up for the service, did their 4 years, 8 years, 12 years, 20, whatever it was, and did extraordinary things. And now they're out and they're back to being like a regular person walking down the street. And you would never know some of the things they've seen or done unless you sat down and talked to them. And I'm really glad this podcast is kind of becoming that. People are being able to tell these stories that you would never really hear because they're not cool enough to be in the history books or whatever, or important enough if you want to make it into that. So it's important that these people get their stories out. It's important for the history. It's important for families, because there's a lot of names that come up on here of people that have passed away. And it's important for families to know that how important their individual was to other people and stuff like that. So I'm super happy to be doing it. And whoever it is in Okie, like I said, I know a few people in Okie that sent that. I appreciate the message. All right, so I have 2 comments on the website on my jkramergraphics.com. It's weird. I don't ever really check the comments on that one. I have a tab for the Former Action Guys podcast, and the videos the audio automatically uploads there. And I don't really get on that part of the site very often, but 2 people have left me messages, so I'll read those out here. First one is from Havoc23. Says, found you by pure accident. Listening to everyone's voice again is the motivation I needed. These guys made my 10 years golden. Here's to the girl in the little red shoes. Okay, I don't know what that means, but here's to the girl in the little red shoes. I don't know. That's cool. Hey, thanks for writing in though, Havoc23, and I'm also glad that you found it. So please spread the word. Continue to tell people. And then the last one I have for you is from Badger22R. So Badger22 Romeo. First heard about it from Facebook post about the Artie mishap story from episode 7, and now listen every chance I get. As an Army vet and corrections officer, I work with former Marines and talk with them about the stories and how they listen to it. Love the stories, the laid-back style, and just a natural conversation. Awesome podcast. Hey, thanks Badger22R for sending that in. Yeah, it's that was the marketing, I guess, the post I made for that incident. I had a buddy send me some photos from that artillery. For those that may not know what I'm talking about, in 2011, Spring Bragg, we went to 10th Marines goes out to Fort Bragg for a month of training. In 2011, we had a 155 howitzer piece explode in the pause as they were loading a round. It exploded, and I was the fire's chief. I was up on the OP approving the mission when that happened, and I had all the comms and stuff like the medevac and all that stuff. I was monitoring everything as it took place. And then the interview itself wasn't it was with Major Shipton. If you want to hear that episode, go back to Major Shipton's episode. And he was with that battery before he chopped over to my liaison team. And he was on the OP as well. So because we both have a personal connection with those guys, that was within our battalion, our artillery battalion. We decided to tell that story. I put it out a couple episodes ago, but if maybe you didn't hear it, or if someone out there knows them, I had a person from that gun crew that it got blown up reach out to me to be on the episode. But I've received so many messages that I don't know what message it was. It was on Facebook. So if you're out there and you still want to come on the show and kind of discuss what it was like being on that gun when it exploded from that faulty fuse, more than willing to have you come on. So hopefully you get this message and we can make that happen, because I'm sure there's a lot of people out there that have a lot of questions regarding that incident. All right. So like I said, I have Grant come on this episode, 12 years. He was a Harrier pilot. Talk about all kinds of stuff. It was great. You guys will enjoy it. And then, as always, if you are not watching this video, if you're just listening, make sure you subscribe to the Former Action Guys podcast on YouTube channel. If you haven't already, you can get in. I do the premiere, so when the videos release, I usually post it as a premiere, and I will sit there and monitor the premiere as I'm working on other stuff, and I can respond to comments for that first as it's playing through the first time. So make sure to check that out and subscribe so that you get notifications about when the videos are premiering. Give a like and leave comments under your favorite episodes. You can also leave a review if you're listening on Apple Podcasts, because it's one of the few platforms that allows reviews, and I want people to know that the show contains quality content. Finally, make sure to check out my website, jkramergraphics.com, and my Instagram page at jkramergraphics. That's jkramergraphics.com and at jkramergraphics on my Instagram. The website is... we haven't stopped doing orders. The COVID-19 has obviously affected us just like it has everybody else. I have multiple print providers that I use to print and deliver the shirts that people order, shirts, hoodies, and whatnot. A couple of them has shut down, but none of the orders have been canceled. Some of them, if you've placed an order recently, some of them may have shifted and maybe a couple days later than expected on delivery. But just know that, just like everybody else, we have been affected, but we have not shut down operations. And so make sure to check out the website. And finally, if you have any questions, you can email me at formeractionguyspodcast@gmail.com, formeractionguyspodcast@gmail.com. And that is it. So enjoy the show. All right. So welcome to the podcast. Why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself and tell people who you are and where you're from?
Yeah. My name is Grant Mauritzson. My call sign is Emilio. I'll let you determine why that is. Originally from Houston, Texas. Joined the Marines in 2006 and left active duty in 2018, and then went to the reserves. So I'm currently reserve status right now as a selective Marine reservist.
Oh, really? I didn't even know that. I didn't realize that you were in the reserves. Also, it looks like my camera froze on my end. Don't worry if it happens. I'm using this like connector from a new camera into my laptop, so just ignore that.
No worries.
But anyway, so you came in 2006, same year I came in. What made you decide to join the Marine Corps?
So it's kind of a funny story. I knew that I wanted to be a pilot in the military, and I just assumed Air Force was the the easiest route. Maybe not the easiest, but like they had the most airplanes, the best chances of being a pilot. So I was actually Air Force ROTC for my first 3 years in college, up until the point where I went and did my flight physical between my junior and my senior year, and color vision from the Air Force,
Really?
which I thought was kind of radical because I'd been a pilot already. I got my pilot's license when I was 17, and so I'd been flying airplanes, just small light props, and I was a flight instructor, and I'd never had any issues with color vision, so it was kind of odd to me that they'd fail me for that. And I had some conspiracies about it. They were significantly downsizing in that fiscal year for 2006 graduates, and I think that I was just an attrition of the numbers, kind of like, all right, the number one guy and the number like 4 guy that comes in today like doesn't pass the medical.
Yeah.
And I mean, they couldn't kick me out, so they found a way for me to just kind of voluntarily get out myself, which kind of worked out because I failed the flight physical, went back, did another semester in ROTC, got out of that, and was just kind of milling about. Didn't really know where I was going to go fly. And then my buddy was like, hey, go talk to this Marine officer selection officer. I was like, okay. So I went to talk to him, and I figured that like all branches probably talk to each other as far as medical stuff goes. So I didn't have a lot of hope that I was going to be fit to fly in the Marines. But I figured I'd done a few years of like ROTC. I still wanted to serve. I just didn't want to be a maintenance officer in the Air Force. So I figured I could drive tanks, be a grunt, something like that in the Marines. So I got to talk to this guy, and I was going to Embry-Riddle Aeronautical University, so the guy knows that he's dealing with a lot of pilots. He knows that these guys want to come to the Marine Corps and fly. So he's like, well, tell you what, man, like I'll send you up for a flight physical before you sign any papers. And I was like, yeah, sure, whatever. And I went up, and sure enough, I aced the flight physical. So no issues with that. And I came back, and he's like, all right, well, if you did fine your flight physical, if you want an air contract, we have some for fiscal year of 7. So all I had to do was just slide my graduation date, and I went to OCS the summer before that, and I saw that you talked to Archer recently on one of your casts, so I saw he talked about the 2 6-week programs, but I did the 1 10-week program from June through August during my senior year. Came back to school, had a semester, and then I graduated.
Okay. So does the military generally, do they want to find someone that has flight experience, or do they prefer to have, or do they even care?
So they don't, it depends. So the Air National Guard, generally guys won't get hired in Air National Guard units unless they have at least a private pilot's license, because the Air National Guard works in that unit, and I don't know that how the system works perfectly, but from what I've seen is that unit, guys will rush that squadron, and that squadron hires the guys. And so you look around, you're like, so let's say that you're not in the military, you look around, you find an Air National Guard unit, you call that unit up directly, and then, you go interview with them, you rush, you make sure that all the guys meet, everyone likes you, you like the unit, and then if they like you, they hire you. If you meet their qualifications. If you're like an unrated guy, as in like a guy that hasn't been like a prior military pilot, they want you to at least have a private pilot's license. Okay. If you're already rated, like for example, if I was an A-10 pilot and I was rushing an A-10 pilot in the active duty Air Force, and I wanted to rush an A-10 aeronautical, it would be a seamless transition from like active duty into that squadron, as long as that squadron wanted to hire me. So Air National Guard is a little bit different than like the active duty military. So in active duty military, like they don't, like the Marine Corps doesn't care if you have a pilot's license ahead of time. None of the other services care that you have prior flight time. It may help you out in later stages during flight training, but yeah, they don't ask that ahead of time necessarily.
So you said you were an instructor pilot before you even decided to join. What were you rated on prior to joining?
So I was just a CFI, CFII, MEI, so I could fly light, propeller, and multi-engine airplanes, which I did. It was great. It was great that I started flying early, because when I got to school in Daytona Beach. It was like, oh, I could work at the Abercrombie and Fitch at the mall, or I could be to earn my part-time cash. And yeah, flight instructing was definitely a lot more lucrative than just working at the Abercrombie Fitch.
Yeah, for sure. A lot of people, it seems like a lot of pilots went to Embry-Riddle. Is that like I mean, that's a pretty big aeronautical school, correct?
Yeah, it's one of the leading aeronautical universities in the world. Two main campuses, Daytona Beach and Prescott. And I went to the Daytona Beach campus. Had a short period there between my during my sophomore year that I went to school up in Maine. But then I ended up coming back down to Embry-Riddle and finishing there. So I started Embry-Riddle, went to Maine for a year, and then I finished up at Embry-Riddle just because I knew I wanted to fly, and so I figured I might as well just get a degree in aeronautics.
Yeah. Yeah, no, that makes sense. Did the people that you were in ROTC with, the Air Force ROTC, what they think once you like couldn't go in the Air Force and then you decided to join the Marines instead?
So most of them were really supportive of it. They thought it was, pretty awesome that I'd kind of beat the system, because, I mean, you know as well as I do that the bureaucracy can kind of grind you up and
for sure
chew you up and spit you out. And so I was kind of a product of that bureaucracy with the whole like flight physical bullshit there in the beginning. And so no, once they found out that I'd gone in the Marines, they were like, dude, you're crazy, one. And then two, once they saw that I'd graduated OCS, gone through TBS, was in flight school, they're like, that's pretty badass that you're able to kind of work the system to work out in your favor.
Yeah. So coming in with an air contract is a little different than most people that would come into OCS, because most people don't come in knowing what field they're going to be in. They're just kind of hoping that they get something great. So how is it as coming in as an air contract person, knowing that you're going to at least get an attempt at flight school, compared to your peers who literally just don't know what the hell's going on? They're just waiting to see what's going to happen.
Yeah. So at OCS, it's really not a lot different, because you're not, when you're at OCS, you're not competing for your future job. When you're at OCS, you're really just trying to get through it and get a commission at the end of it.
Yeah. What was it like when you finished OCS and TBS, and then now you're headed to flight school and you're actually going to get to start doing your flight training?
Feeling. We actually we had a guy show up to our about 2 or 3 weeks before TBS graduation, and he was the mock officer down in Pensacola. The mock officer is the guy that, I can't remember what mock stands for right now, but the mock officer is kind of the guy that like rounds up all the lieutenants when they show up from TBS, and just kind of like keeps them in line until they class up and go off to go actually like start flight school. And I remember this mock officer showed up like 3 weeks before graduation at TBS and pulled in all the air contracts. He's like, all right, guys, like you're about to trade in your flak jackets and your Ilbies for a pair of Ray-Bans and board shorts, hang out down in Pensacola. And we're all like, yes, this is awesome. So yeah, it was cool to get done with TBS. You learn a lot of cool things at TBS, but it's cool to get down there and actually start doing like your job and like working towards what you join the Marine Corps to do.
Yeah. Now you ended up in the Harrier, or you ended up as a Harrier pilot. But when you get to flight school, can you? I had a guy on before. His name's Captain Jerry Geller. He's on like episode 10 or 12 or something like that. He was an F-4 Phantom pilot during Vietnam, and he got shot down in Vietnam, which is pretty wild. It's a really good story for those that may not have heard it. He talks about flight school somewhat, but obviously it's changed a lot since the 60s. So could you give kind of a breakdown of what it was like, what flight school was like for you and for someone that may be on a path to get into a jet?
Yeah, absolutely. So everyone starts out, they show up in Pensacola, either Navy or Marine Corps. And the first step of flight school is you go through what's called API, Aviation Pre-Flight Indoctrination, which consists of academics, swimming, and then a little bit of survival. So the first 4 weeks are academics and swimming, and then the last 2 weeks are mainly survival type stuff, so physiology related to flying. Once you're complete with API, and everyone you're in a mixed class of Marines and Navy in your API class. Once you complete API, and then you kind of branch off. So guys will either go to Corpus Christi, they'll stay in Pensacola and fly out of Whiting Field, which is up in Milton. Or there's a few guys that actually get sent out to Enid, Oklahoma, to train with the Air Force.
Mm-hmm.
And those guys, those guys definitely have it a little bit harder. Air Force flight school, that like during their primary phase, is a lot more stringent and structured than the Navy flight school. So those are the three choices for primary. They now fly the T6. I flew the T-34. I stayed at Whiting Field in Pensacola. So finish API, go to Whiting Field. When you go through primary, it's you do a couple weeks of just kind of like basic FAMs or familiarization flights with the aircraft. Backing up, sorry. You start with like systems. You go into some really just kind of this dark box that you sit in, and there's all the controls and all the buttons, but there's no actual visuals. So you just kind of it's kind of like a procedural trainer, if anything. So you learn systems, you kind of learn the cockpit. Then you start the FAM phase, and I may be leaving some stuff out. It's been like 14 years since I've been there. So you go through the FAM phase, which is just basic aircraft handling. You do your first solo, which is primarily knowing the course rules in and out of Whiting, doing some landings at some outlying fields, and then you go into the aerobatics phase. Because you actually go up and bend the airplane around a little bit, and you get to go do it. They give you like 1 or 2 instructor hops in the aerobatics phase, and then you have like 3 or 4 that are just solo flights. They just give you a T-34 to go out in the area and like just drill holes in the sky. So that's pretty cool. And then the last like big portion of primary is instrument training, and that's where you learn to fly essentially in the clouds. So they go up and they put you in a position where you can't see outside, and you solely have to rely on your radio instruments to navigate around. Think about the sky being like this. There's like these highways in the sky, right? So you may be traveling on the I-80 of the sky, but you got to get over to like the I-90, and so there's certain pathways that are published on these maps, on these charts, that you have to fly and use your instruments in order to navigate doing that. And so that's kind of like the last big part is just assessing your ability to operate on instruments alone. And then from there, you'll track select. So you'll either go to helicopters, jets, tilt rotor, or C-130s. So there's like 4 different tracks you can branch off onto. Of my class, if you want to call it that, there were 3 of us that finished primary at about the same time, and it was me, another Marine, and a Navy guy. The Marine went. I got jets. The other Marine got helicopters. He went on the fly Cobras, and then the Navy guy, he also got jets. So primary goes. Once you get jets, then you go off to either Kingsville down in South Texas, which is south of Corpus Christi, or over to Meridian in Mississippi. And so I ended up going to Kingsville to fly the T-45. And it's kind of like any Navy Marine Corps school. It's like, hurry up and wait. As soon as I got there, there was basically a 3-month waiting period before I was even going to class up. And then once you start the process, because like the way Navy flight school works out, it's a lot of, you kind of just like progress when they have the capacity to progress you. And so you may find periods during your actual training where you're off for a couple weeks, couple months at a time. And so jet school, just straight through, you can get through in about 9 to 10 months. But because of all the delays, it actually took me about 14 months to get all the way through jet school.
Okay.
In Kingsville.
Before we get more into jets, on the first phase of the training, you talked about survivability, and when you said that, I was thinking, or survival, I was thinking like SEER or something like that. But that's not what you meant, right? You meant survivability within the aircraft? Yeah,
so it's like flight physiology type stuff. So they this is where they put you in the helo dunker.
Okay.
And then there's other things like high altitude flying, how your body reacts to to air with lesser concentration of oxygen. So they there's a few events they'll do, like they put you in the chamber, the hyperbaric is altitude, hypobarics. I don't know. There's one for like divers, and there's one for like the guys who go higher up in altitude. So whatever that chamber is, they put you in it. They make you take your mask off. They see how you act. It's when you start getting hypoxic, and they have you like doing patty cake, and you see guys. There's videos of it on YouTube. It's pretty funny actually of these guys. They look they're basically just drunk.
Yeah.
And some of these guys, like the intent behind that training is that and start taking in that oxygen. But there's some guys that'll let it just go, and like it's basically like they're stumbling home from the bar at 3 a.m, right there in broad daylight. So it's pretty trippy to watch. And then there's some other things like it's called the spin and puke. They put you in this chair and it's in a dark room. You tuck your head between your legs and they just kind of spin you around and see how your spatial, your disorientation is. And then like I'm alluded to earlier, there's the helo dunker portion of it, which is they put you in this kind of like this mock helicopter hole.
Yeah.
They drop you in a pool. They turn it upside down, and then you have to try to escape through one of the exit points that are in the helicopter. And the first time going through it, it's kind of a stressful event because it's what I would call like a Jeopardy event. Like if you don't pass it, it's kind of a big deal. Like they could use that to kick you out of flight school. Whereas you have to requalify. You have to do swim physiology every 4 years after you've done that initial one. And every time that I've been to it since then, we do the helo dunker. It's completely non-Jeopardy. It's totally chill. Like I was a Yuma guy flying Harrier, so we just go shoot out to the Miramar pool and do our requalification there every 4 years. But when you're in flight school, it's stressful because you're like, if I fail this, like that could be reason for them to kick me out of program. So that's kind of, and then there's also a little bit of land survival stuff. Like you go over the gear that's in your vest. We had a day-long course where they actually sat us down and talked to us about different ways to survive. But this wasn't necessarily the SEER training that you go to later on in your career. This was more just kind of initial survival type stuff. If you find yourself ejected out of an airplane during training, this is how you act or conduct yourself until the rescue vehicles arrive. Which, depending on where you jump out, probably wouldn't be that long in most areas in the United States. Yeah. But I guess there are some areas out near the Appalachians or in the hillier areas of Alabama where I guess you could find yourself sitting out there for longer period of time.
Or over water. You hear recently it wasn't a pilot, but it was either a PJ, I think it was a PJ or a CCT got accidentally pulled out of an aircraft during jump operations and landed in the Gulf. Yeah, it was like 2 months ago, I think. And never recovered him. This is a dude who was at the end of his PJ or CCT training, so that dude could tread water and stuff like that. And it's just one of those things in the water, in the ocean like that, when there's nothing, I don't know.
It actually happened about a year after I left primary. One of the instructors there that I'd actually done a significant amount of my instrument training with, him and a student crashed a T-34 into Lake Pontchartrain, right outside of New Orleans.
Yeah.
And it was in February, and the instructor actually ended up drowning, and the student got rescued, but he was in the water for 6 hours.
Jeez. And
was hypothermic, all that. Not good. But yeah, so definitely they definitely go over some of the water survival stuff too, how to deploy your raft. And
does it happen? Does that happen very often? Crashes in flight school?
Not really often. The airplanes are starting to get a little bit older, so we're starting to see more. Or they're starting to see more. The mishap rate climb a little bit, but I would argue that it's fairly safe, and some of the mishaps you may see could be pilot related, and not necessarily aircraft.
Yeah.
Environment. They may lose like one T-45 or per fiscal year or something like that, but it's not. And the T-34s were definitely getting old, but the T-6s are pretty reliable.
We just lose one a year. Whatever.
Yeah. The survival rate of the ejection system's pretty top notch.
Well, that's good then. So that first phase, what was the most difficult part overall for students, and then you specifically, what did you have the most problems with?
I think for most students, instruments is kind of the toughest part of the initial, just because that's something they've never been exposed to. You know what I mean? A lot of the guys who didn't have any prior flight time, that's something that they'd never seen. School, I guess, and they get 20, 25 hours in a Cessna, and it only gets them through their first solo, and then they start the like API and the Navy flight school from there. But they just kind of use that as like an indoctrination to flying airplanes. And so when guys start, the FAM stage of primary, they've at least been behind the controls of an airplane before, and they can kind of understand, like, you pull back to go up, you push forward to go down. They understand kind of the basic aerodynamics of the plane. But once they get into instruments and you kind of take away that ability to like see outside, and you're strictly navigating off needles and like dials inside the airplane, it starts to get a little bit dicier. And I think guys generally have a harder time with that. For me, I think my hardest part was because I had about 750 hours of flight time, 400 of which was as an instructor. So I've been flying airplanes for a long time. I think the hardest part, like, to just kind of like forget about some of that stuff, like the way that I flew as a civilian pilot, and then like indoctrinate myself into the Navy Marine Corps way of flying. And the way I did that, and I kind of overcame it, was I wouldn't tell anybody how much flight time I had. If like an instructor asked me, like, "Hey, have you flown before?" Like, I would just be like, "Yeah, I got a couple hours," because I didn't want that perception that, like, oh, this guy thinks he's shit hot. This guy thinks he knows everything. Yeah. Even though I wouldn't think that. Like, I didn't want that false perception of me. So I was really low key about having prior flight time, just more or less not get fucked with. And then that also helped me get myself into the Navy Marine Corps style flying a lot easier, because it was easy for me to kind of just procedurally speaking, a civilian pilot who's only up to like a flight instructor may not, and only flies like light civil aircraft. I mean, you can get that thing off the ground in like 5 minutes. So procedurally, as far as like running flows and things like that inside the cockpit, there's not a lot of that as a young civilian pilot. So the Navy Marine Corps does a really good job at teaching like flows throughout the cockpit. So you do a flow and then you do a checklist. So
what do you mean by a flow? Are you talking about like your scans that you're going through?
Kind of, yeah. So like if you're going to do like your pre-flight flow, for example, there's certain things that you want to like go through the cockpit, and like they have kind of a sweeping motion as you're going through the cockpit and you're checking everything, and you're going up the right side, you're going across the dials, the HUD, you're going down the left side, and you're just kind of like making sure all the switches and everything's in the right position to start the engine. And then you back that up with a pre-flight checklist. So you do the flow checklist to make sure you got everything, right? Mm-hmm. And then like you do the next flow, and then you'll go through the checklist to make sure you got it. As a civilian pilot, you're really just kind of like, okay, this thing's got like 5 buttons on it, right? So you're just like, move this switch, move this dial, turn this lever, and start the engine, and then off you go. Obviously, the military flies more advanced aircraft, and so it's a great starting point to get you in the habit of working through the cockpit and then going through the checklist. Now, so for me, I think that was kind of like the hardest part.
Yeah, that makes sense, because you got to break off old habits, bad habits, I guess, if you will, bad habits coming from the civilian side.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
For the people that don't know, like when you're going through flight school, it's needs of the Marine Corps. Like you can't sign up to be an F-18 pilot. You sign up to be a pilot, and then, well, hey, we actually have this available, so you can take it. I assume you were wanting jets from the beginning.
Yeah, so that's kind of funny because I did. I'd wanted to be a jet pilot for as long as I can remember, and my dad was an old airline guy, so he was an old jet guy himself. He wasn't in the military, but he flew airliners. So he totally supported me wanting to go fly jets. And I remember it was about a week before selection, I was having this like internal struggle, because in primary, a lot of the instructors in primary, they come from all type model series inside the Navy Marine Corps, right? So you're flying with jet guys, you're flying with helicopter guys, you're flying with C-130 guys. To go back to be an instructor in primary, you can fly any one of the aircraft that we fly in the Navy Marine Corps. Mm-hmm. And so I was flying with all these different guys. There was only one jet guy that I can remember flying with, and the rest of the guys were Helo or C-130 dudes. And man, they were really hyping me up to like fly Helos, And I was like, it was about a week before selection, and I'm sitting there, I'm thinking to myself, I'm like, you know what? I kind of want to fly a Cobra. You know what I mean? Like, I'm like, that'd be pretty badass. I'm in the Marine Corps. Like talk to any Cobra pilot, and they'll talk about like, oh yeah, we're like the grunts of the sky, whatever.
No way.
So I thought that sounded pretty cool, and like I was really kind of buying into the total marine aspect of marine aviation, and so thought that would be pretty cool. The downside being that if you go helicopters, you also have a chance of flying a 53 or a Frog at the time, a 46, and I didn't really want to fly either one of those, but the thought of flying a Cobra or a Huey sounded pretty badass. Don't tell any other jet guys I said that.
I was saying, all the jet dudes that that might be watching this are dying a little bit on the inside. They're like, this motherfucker.
No. Don't worry, it gets better. So like, I decided that I'm gonna fly. I want to fly helicopters. Fuck this. Like, I'm just gonna do it. Like, I can always go back and be a fixed wing aviator. I got enough fixed wing time, whatever.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember I called my dad like the night before selection, and I'm actually glad I did, because he's like, "Are you fucking kidding me?" He's like, "You wanted to fly jets your whole life, and now just like out of nowhere you want to fly helicopters?" He's like, "Sleep on that." He's like, "Think about it." I was like, "Okay." And like any like rebellious young like 23-year-old, I'm like, screw him. He doesn't know what I want and whatever. But I slept on it. I woke up the next day. I'm like, what am I doing, man? Like, being a jet pilot's what I've wanted like my whole life. So like, why would I change that? And like, you can still do a lot of cool things with a jet. So, I went in and wrote down jets number 1, helos number 2, C-130s, and then tilt rotor. And as luck would have it, I was able to get a jet spot. And I was also, I think it's, they always say that like number 1 in their class gets to choose where they go. And primary, that doesn't really apply because there's no real class to speak of. You have what's called an NSS, which is like kind of your overall grade point, and they have a cutoff. Basically, you have to get above a certain NSS to have jets. So jet grades, you can apply for jets, but if they need helicopter pilots or they need C-130 pilots, then like you said, it's gonna be like needs of the Marine Corps. So
yeah,
I was lucky in that I had above the jet NSS, and I was like right at the beginning of a giant, what they call a jet draft. Like, they were really short on jet pilots, and so over the course of the next few classes, from what I heard, and I'm not sure how much of this is true, but they were actually giving waivers for guys who were kind of hovering right around the jet NSS, maybe a few points below it, and still allowing them to go jets because they needed jet pilots. And there were guys in later classes that they wanted to fly helicopters, but they got jets because it was like, sorry, like, we need jet pilots right now. And so, yeah, it's totally needs of the Marine Corps. And it can swing one way or the other as far as like what they need at the time.
What's pretty wild is you talk to any C-130 guy, pilot, and they're like, dude, this is the best job ever. They're like, we just toss our cooler or whatever the hell we want in the back, and we fly all over the world, like, seeing everything. It's like the big secret of the Marine Corps. How would you have felt if you would have got like a C-130 or something like that?
Oh, I mean, like, my philosophy is, man, if you're an aviator and like you're a pilot and you love flying airplanes, like, you're gonna love whatever you fly.
Yeah, you get paid to fly.
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, it's every community is different as far as like, the bros that are in that community, and even like once you get into the jets, like every community within the jet community itself, like every sub community, like they have their own personalities too. So
yeah,
as long as you can jive with the other pilots in the unit, then I mean, you're golden, and you're gonna love it. But I have heard stories of guys who have gotten out to the fleet, gotten out to their squadrons, and in any type model series, and they've been like, I hate it, and it's strictly because of the people that are in their unit, that they just don't jive very well. So you can definitely get some, you can get different personalities in some of the communities. But I would argue that like you're gonna love your airplane, and it's gonna be love at first sight. When you first climb into your actual airplane that you're assigned to fly.
Yeah.
So.
No.
Yeah.
I agree, man. I'm sure it's great. Like, no matter what, I'm sure there were guys though when the selections came out that were kind of butthurt about what they got.
Yeah. So the guy in my class that got helos, he's still a really good friend of mine. He's a great dude. He's a firefighter up in Boston now. But he I remember it was like that same time that I was having that struggle about helicopters. He was like, you know what, man? He's like, I think I might want to go jets, dude. Like, it sounds pretty cool. I'm like, yeah, whatever you want. And then we got our NSSs like the next day or whatever, and he was a pretty low NSS. He's like, you know what, dude? Fuck it. I'm just gonna put helicopters.
That's fun.
But I mean, like he went out and flew helos. He did 2 tours in Afghanistan. I mean, he loved flying the Cobra. He didn't really like he had some personality clashes with some of the guys in the community, but I mean,
dude, that whole community has a personality clash within themselves.
Yeah, they do.
Cobra guys are the biggest assholes, and I love them.
Yeah.
But they're the biggest assholes, and they're the worst to each other too.
It can be, which is funny because like some of the guys that I hold the closest to my heart are Cobra guys, like like Archer. Like I love Archer, and but I mean, yeah, he was a Cobra guy. This friend of mine, Matt Palumbo.
Yeah, I know Palumbo.
You know Palumbo?
Yeah.
Okay, yeah. I mean, great dude. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So, but it's I got a lot of respect for guys that even if they don't jive so much with the community or the culture where they are, they still go out and do great things. They make the best of it, and then they get out and go live their life. So.
Well, I think part of that comes from, for me, I think a lot of that comes from one. It takes a certain mentality just to even sign up for the Marine Corps because it's harder, or at least you have that illusion that it's harder because that's what you've been, inundated with your entire life through pop culture, is that the Marine Corps is like hard. Then you have like the Army and then the Air Force and the Navy or whatever. So it takes a certain personality just to even sign up for the Marine Corps. So I think that breeds a certain level of like excellence within the military or within the Marine Corps itself because.
Yeah,
it's almost like guys that go into special operations, like the people you're there with, like want to be there. Like they chose to be in that. It sucks, it's hard, but they wanted to be there. And it's kind of the same with. I think the Marine Corps has that same kind of feeling to it because, like I said, it's a certain personality. So it's you do run into a lot of people that it's like quality of work. No matter I'm gonna grow where I'm planted is a stupid phrase that everybody uses, right. But the quality of work, like. They want to come in, they want to do their job well. Even if it's a shitty job, they're like, man, this sucks, but I don't want to be seen as a piece of shit, so I'm going to do the job really well. So I think we were lucky in the Marines to have that kind of mantra, I guess, or whatever you want to call it.
Yeah, everyone's kind of moving forward towards like a similar goal. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And that definitely creates bonds. And one thing that I noticed just from like getting out of the Marine Corps and like leaving my squadron was, you get out. I was 34 when I got out, and it was like, okay, like, how do you make friends as an adult? Now that I'm like hanging out with like my squadron buddies, which are like you're put into the squadron, and like all of a sudden it's like these are your friends. By the way, like here's your desk, here's your computer, there's your jet, and oh, by the way, these are all your friends now. Whether you've met them before or not, and so it's great in that it creates those bonds for you, those lifelong bonds with some of these guys, and but then you get out and you're like, okay, well, they're all still back in Yuma, and I'm out here.
Yeah.
We still keep in touch and we hang out when we can when I'm in Yuma, but for the most part, you're like, shit, like how do I make friends like not in a squadron when they're issued to me,
For sure, man. I think that's one of the hardest things that guys that get out have to deal with, and that guys that are like, I can't wait to get out, screw the Marine Corps, they get out, and then they realize how good they had it with the people that they were around and stuff like that, and not like forced friends, but you always have someone there, I'm always working with these dudes, I know these people, a lot of times their families if they're like good friends and stuff like that. Absolutely. You just do. For people that are on the outside, you can't understand it. I don't even know what you could. It'd be like being on a football team, but you live with them all the time. You're always just working and living together and hanging out and stuff like that. Even within your group, there's always dudes that are like nerds off to the side, but they're still part of the group.
Absolutely.
It's just. It's tough for guys though. I know what you're saying though, especially now, coronavirus. You can't even get out and go do anything.
You go outside.
I got lucky when I first moved out. When I first got out, the apartment I moved into, I moved right off base because I had a couple months left and I wanted somewhere close to base but close to the beach. So I moved into this little spot in Oceanside, and nobody in the little complex. It was only like 8 apartments. No one in there was military, and which was cool because. I was on my way out. I was getting ready to start terminal. I had 75 days of terminal, I think is how many I ended up taking.
Yeah. I think you got to you're on terminal.
Yeah, I had a good time on terminal. But my neighbors were all, like I just, just as you do, you say hi to them and whatever. And we just ended up clicking, and we all, like, I don't live up there anymore, but I still drive up to hang out with some of them and stuff like that. You definitely got to find a group when you get out. That's the tough part, man, because, and I've said it a lot of times on the podcast, people that listen to the podcast on the regular have heard it, but you kind of start feeling like an asshole when you get out and people start having conversations and you're like, oh yeah, I've been there. Oh yeah, I know where that place is. Because the crazy experiences that you get in the military, you feel like you start becoming that one-up guy. Like, oh yeah, I've been to Hong Kong. Oh yeah, I've been to Singapore. But I mean, you're in a different world though. You're a airline pilot now, so I guess everybody there's traveled all over the world. But
but it's still like, 'cause you don't like the guys that I fly with are guys who have been with the company for like 20, 25 years. So they're significantly older than me usually.
Mm-hmm.
And like the guys who are like my age group, like the other first officers, like we never fly together. So you kind of just have to reach out from, Facebook groups or whatever, and like see who lives in your area. And actually it's funny, like one of my closest friends at United, really just what I'd argue is one of my closest friends, is he's a 30-year retired Marine colonel who flew 46s.
Oh, nice.
So but he was in my indoctrination class at United, and so and he lives up there lives down there in Oceanside. But yeah, like we kind of developed this friendship because we're both prior Marines.
Yeah.
He was like significantly more of a career guy than I was.
How hardcore is he about frogs? Those dudes are maniacs normally.
Yeah, he's one of the most like humble people I've ever met. But he's got some wild stories. He was he was actually a regimental arrow with Mattis, kicking in doors in Iraq back in 2003.
Jeez.
Yeah, this guy is like, but like you wouldn't, like if you met him or talked to him, like you wouldn't even know. He's just super down to earth and low key. And then he was a commanding officer of a frog squadron in Iraq in 04, 05, I think, something like that.
That would have been that would have been an interesting time. It's weird how we look back at guys that were in like the invasion and stuff. We're like, oh, you were in the invasion, or you were in like early Iraq. Like, wow.
Yeah.
And young guys now that haven't, now the Marine Corps is full of dudes, or the military in general is full of people that really haven't deployed, or their deployment is like a MEU or something like that. And they look back at dudes that have gone to Iraq or Afghanistan at all, and they're like, "Oh shit! Like you went to Afghanistan. Like what was that like?"
Yeah.
It's
I mean, like as well as I do. Depending on when you're there, like you're like nothing was really going on, right? Or it could have been like exciting time of your life, So
for sure, yeah.
It's different stories, but this is a guy that's like, I mean, he's seen shit, but like just talking to him and like hanging out with him, like you wouldn't even know that he'd been a Marine in his past life, Those
are the best people, though, the guys that have like 50 bumper stickers on their car. Like you always see these on social media.
Jackets with all the patches on it,
Yeah. You gotta have your what's that? Your tour jacket or whatever. It's got every place you stopped on it.
Maverick.
Yeah, your Maverick jacket. So anyway, let's go back to flight school. So now you got selected for jets. You're heading to, where'd you say that you went for your next step of training?
I went to Kingsville,
okay,
down in South Texas.
Now, at that point, though, you don't know what jet you're getting into, correct?
Right. So once you get to, it's called advanced. Advanced is where you go fly the helicopter, you go fly multi-engine airplane, or you go fly a jet. So that's just you start with primary, flying the single engine, and then you go to the single engine prop, and then you go to advanced from there. And advanced is going to be specialized based on what you're going to fly in the fleet. So for me, going to fly jets, my advanced was in T-45 down in South Texas. And so you start out advanced. You start out advanced with kind of the way primary starts out. It's all just FAMs, getting you ready to solo the airplane yourself. So a little bit different than the T-34. Flying a T-45, it's a jet, and it's a little bit slicker. So rather than having this big propeller out in front of your airplane that essentially causes it's your main source of thrust, but it can also causes a lot of drag.
Mm-hmm.
The T-45 is just a pointy nose airplane, and so there's not that giant drag source out in front. So you really got to get the hang of, like, when I put the power up and I pull the power back, like that airplane's not going to slow down as quickly as like a propeller airplane will. So it's a lot cleaner. a lot more slick. So that was kind of a big difference going to a jet. But it's broken up kind of the same way. You start with academics. You go into the jet. You do FAMs. After your first solo, you go out and do formation flying. You do some basic instrument stuff, and then you do a little bit more advanced instrument stuff. And this is like the first time you get your actual instrument rating in the military. And then you finish off after forms. And you're anywhere in that formation. So you could sit there and you're flying off your lead, but then you got two guys behind you that are flying off you, so you got to be smooth also. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And so that's kind of cool to go through that, see that for the first time, and you're flying with like other students in the formation, so it's like your friends. You know, so it's like kind of your first time going up and flying with like your friends.
That's cool.
So that's pretty rad. After forms, you go into what's called FCLPs, which are field carrier landing practices, and that's kind of to basically, like, once you get into the T-45, everything they teach you is about being a carrier pilot or being a naval aviator, you know? So it's a little bit, it's not like a normal landing. You're not flying in, you know, cutting the power, going into a flare, and then like trying to have a smooth touchdown. It is, you're flying power on, basically trying to land on a precision spot, and you're constantly practicing for when you go to the carrier. In fact, Kingsville, like when you go out to to do landings, they've always got the OLS, or the optical landing system, out there that you use for guidance to get you down into the under the carrier deck. And they've actually got like a carrier deck painted out on the runway to like simulate touching down inside the wires. So every landing you do from the moment you start flying the T-45 is practicing to eventually go to the carrier, because you will go to the carrier in the T-45. So FCLPs are kind of like your first like real exposure to landing on the carrier. That there's actually an LSO, or a landing signal officer, that sits out in this little box, and he kind of gives you guidance from the ground as far as like how your profile is looking to fly the aircraft down onto the carrier deck. So you'll do that FCLPs, and then from there, for the Marine pilots, you just go right into basically advanced tactical flying from there. The Navy guys, when I was going through, I think they still do it this way, the Navy guys, as soon as they finish FCLPs, they get put onto like kind of a different track. So they have guys that are going to go strike, which are F-18s, but then they also have guys who will go off to fly E-2, C-2s. So like the radar airplane, the airborne early warning aircraft that have the big dome on the top of it, they fly off the carrier. That's an E-2, and then the C-2 is the big cargo plane that they use to fly on and off the carrier as well. So the Navy guys have yet another like track select process where they know if they're still going to go fly jets, or if they're going to go fly one of these prop airplanes off a carrier. So they're still going to be carrier pilots, but they just don't know if it's going to be in a jet or in a prop. And I'll get to like what they do in a minute. But for the Marines, it's transparent. We just go right from intermediate jet into advanced jet, which is the tactical portion of flying the jet. So once you get into the tactical portion, it's your first exposure to weapons. So they actually hang these little 25-pound. You've seen them, the 25-pound blue bomb.
Yeah, the Mark 40 something or whatever.
The Mark 76s.
Mark 76,
yeah. I'm trying to remember what they were too. They hang those on the wings, and we go out. And we do like manual bombing, which is, I mean, I would love to show a JTAC exactly what this is, because it is, I know JTACs are like, oh, you missed by, if we're out there flying our Harriers, like, oh, you missed by 20 meters, like you suck, right? But I mean, this thing's like no shit, like this. It's this reticle inside the HUD, and all it is are mills, and so you're bombing just based off mills alone, and it's all just like Kentucky windage. You roll in on the target, and like you set it like at about this spot right now, at like kind of a no wind spot. You pickle it, you see where your bomb lands, and then you come back around and make adjustments from there. And it's super. I mean, the fact that like I think it seems like guys back in like Korea used to bomb like this, just kind of
right.
Throw your thumb out there, see where the winds are, and make adjustments. So you do a little bit of weapons handling. You do tactical formations, which are now you go from flying these like what we call administrative formations, where you're right up on each other's wingtips, to like spreading that formation out, and now you're thinking like more of like a fighting mindset, setting yourself up for any kind of like offensive. or defensive type fight. You do BFM, which is a basic fighter maneuvers. So you actually go out and like fight another T-45. That's a pretty fun stage. And then at some point during all that, depending on when there's a carrier available, you'll actually go out and do carrier landings on a big deck. And so that's, even for Harrier pilots, which we all have 10 traps to our name, at least 10 traps to our name, meaning we've gone out in T-45s and caught the wire. That's an exciting stage, man. It's super dynamic, and it's a lot of fun, but it also requires a lot of concentration to do. Out to the carrier and get to do landings. And then you do some like low level stuff as well. And after that, after you complete that advanced jet, then you get your wings and go on to your primary airplane.
So when you get to, like, for me as a outsider looking in and seeing, a guy that's just watched movies and stuff, it seems like the fighter portion of it would be like super, like I'd be like super pumped, like, yes, I'm finally getting to do like a, an air-to-air combat kind of thing. Like,
yeah.
What was it like the first time you went up, and did you win your first dogfight?
Dude, like I didn't know what was going on. It's funny, you bring up you think about like Top Gun, right? And you watch like the flying sequences for that, and it's exciting watching it. You know what I mean? Like they're doing aileron rolls, and they're pulling up and pitching down, and like they're flying, like tail chasing the guy in front of them.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean that's great for the cinema, but I mean in real life, air to air, it's all about like max performing your airplane and and thinking about it in terms of like flying a big circle. You know what I mean? So if you got a guy that's flying a big, fat, loose circle, for example, he's just kind of like arcing around the sky. If you can fly a tighter circle inside of that, then you can get behind him and essentially move in for a type of kill. That's a super like rudimentary thought about BFM and how it works. So, but yeah, when you go out there, you realize you're like, holy crap, this is a lot of pulling G's. It's a lot of banking, a lot of up, a lot of down, and it's more physical than I think a lot of people realize off the get-go. And I mean, just the amount of like G forces and gravitational forces on your body when you start pulling that airplane. I mean, it's enough to when you get done with the flight, you're like, oh man, I'm smoked. Then you got to get gas and go back out and do it again. So
yeah.
They teach us from early on like how to. One of the things that we have training events that we have to do before we actually show up to advanced is we have to go to the centrifuge, which is that. So you know what I mean? You sit in that big ball and it just like spins you around.
Yeah, I've seen those videos on YouTube.
yeah. And they teach you what's called the anti-G straining maneuver, and it's basically you want to have a strong core and you want to have strong legs, and you want to flex those muscles in your core and flex those muscles in your legs and keep your upper body as loose as possible. And then you want to breathe in a way that keeps positive pressure on the lungs. And what that does is it keeps that blood circulating and keeps it from pulling. Because once you're pulling G's, your blood, if you don't resist it, your blood is going to, and then your brain's going to lose function and you're going to lose consciousness. And that's what they call a G lock, or G-induced loss of consciousness. So the way to counteract G lock is you strengthen all your muscles in your core and your legs, you tighten down on it, and that essentially kind of keeps the blood from pooling in your extremities. And then you use this positive pressure breathing, which they call the Hick Maneuver. Mm-hmm. And what that does is it keeps positive pressure in your lungs and allows that blood now to keep circulating. So you're constricting your muscles keeps you from pooling, and then keeping positive pressure in your lungs keeps that oxygenated blood flowing through your system and keeps it going up to your brain so you can stay conscious while you're pulling these G's. And so, as you can imagine, doing all that straining and that type of breathing, it like after a while wears on you, and you're just like, holy crap, I am smoked. Yeah. And you might have only done one set, and you got to go out and complete that event. You have to do like 3 or 4 sets, and by that point you're out of gas anyways. But they really do a good job at kind of taking you to that first training event through the centrifuge, but then like kind of giving you the tools and techniques for longevity as a fighter pilot. And I
think I might have lost you.
You there?
Yeah. It froze for a second.
Okay.
What?
Still
So
there?
say that last part that you were talking about again. You said
Yeah.
that they do a good job of getting you ready.
Yeah. By teaching you the anti-G strain maneuver and the Hick maneuver when you're with your breathing, but then they also, as far as like longevity as a fighter pilot, they really harp on make sure you're hydrated, make sure you're eating well, you have a good diet, and things like that. They A lot of guys had the stigma about not wanting to eat before they go fly. You know what I mean? That was more like, I remember in primary there were guys that were like, I don't want to eat at least 2 hours before I fly in case I get airsick. But I mean, your body really needs those nutrients, and you need like the brain function, to be able to operate in that environment. So it is important that eat a Cliff Bar or something with some heavy carbs before you go and fight, especially because you're going to be putting your body through a workout.
Yeah, for sure.
For sure.
Uh,
But yeah, get back to your question. Yeah, air to air is fun, but it can also be pretty taxing on your body.
are there any guys that get dropped from the course because they can't maintain like within the G-Lock simulator?
Yeah, I mean that's a.
I think I lost you again.
Oh, you lose me, man.
I don't know if it's my internet or yours. It's probably me.
Probably mine.
Who knows? So what were you saying again? You as soon as you started, it cut off.
Yeah. So when you're in the centrifuge, they run you through like 5 or 6 profiles of varying G forces, and usually the one that gets guys the most. They make you do this one profile that's 7.5 Gs for like 15 seconds, and you're looking over your shoulder. So you're simulating being in a tight turning fight, cranking down on the jets. You're getting a lot of Gs.
Mm-hmm.
You're putting a lot of Gs on the jet, and you're also looking behind you because you're trying to keep sight of the guy that's behind you. So that gets a lot of guys because like that's a lot, right? Like looking over your shoulder, 7.5 Gs, and like you're also still trying to do all. They give you an hour, a couple hours, let you drink some water, get some food in you, and then they put you through another ride again. If you pass out again on that one, I think you got to go back like 3 or 4 months later and essentially like redo the course, which is really like it should be no drama, but I guess there have been guys in the past that have gone to do the second one and still can't do it. And it shouldn't be that much of an issue to take that guy now and be like, okay, well, you're not going to be a jet pilot anymore. You're now going to be a C-130 guy, right? So, and I've even seen guys who don't do well in jets. Like they do fine through like maybe the first portion of jet school, like the intermediate portion, but then when they get to the tactical stuff, like they just don't get it or they just don't perform well. And I have heard of guys who have been moved from jets down to C-130s or down to Ospreys because I shouldn't say down, but they've been moved across to like C-130s or Ospreys just because they weren't performing as well in the tactical portion. And if the Marine Corps is like, well, we need more Osprey pilots or we need more C-130 pilots, it shouldn't be an issue to move that guy over to allow them to that track.
Yeah. It seems like it's one of those things where you have to be able to perform at high performance in a high stress environment is like a requirement, and there's really no acceptability for anything less than like great performance and something like that. It's just the same. I put a post up the other day on Instagram about how even in these high stress situations you just have to perform. Like there's no exception, or there's no way out of it. Like if I'm in Afghanistan and I'm in an ambush, it's either fight through it, figure it out, like be calm and fight through it, or get fucked up. And obviously we don't want the latter. So we try to keep the best guys to keep us that can fight through it.
Yeah, and so much of that is just on your training. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? Like
for sure,
you train to it so much so that it becomes like initial shock of, oh shit, this is happening. It's okay. Well, then I'm just going to perform steps A through D, and we'll reassess and see how it works out, right? Maybe a little bit of creativity, but yeah, you're right. Like there's the Navy Marine Corps is going to set that standard, as far as what they want in their tactical aviators, and I mean it's kind of like that joke. What do you call the bottom graduate of his med school class?
Yeah,
doctor.
Yeah, exactly.
What do you call the bottom? the bottom flight school student pilot,
Yeah.
So as long as you're above that standard, like you have your entire career to perfect that art of operating under duress and operating under more intense and stressful situations.
So next, I want to get into how, like, at what point you decide or you find out if you're going to F-18s or Harriers or whatever else available at the time. But before that, if you could kind of, up until this point in your training, everything that you had known prior to this was based off TV, movies, and stuff like that.
Right.
And now you're like pretty far into your training. You're into jet training. Do you think at the time? Do you think the training was preparing you for what you thought you were going to be doing? Like, was the training up to what you thought it was going to be? Was it better than you thought? Maybe worse than you thought?
So you're talking about flight school?
Yeah, like flight school or just general military training up into that point.
Yeah. So, I mean, like, I'll speak to flight school since that's what I know the most. But flight school is like graduating flight school is kind of like graduating high school. Okay. You know what I mean? It's like, congratulations on completing the easiest part of your career. Because once you go on from flight school and now you actually move into your fighter that you're going to fly, whether it be F-18s or Harriers or at the time Prowlers, now I guess F-35s, you know how to fly an airplane, you know how to fly a jet, and you can fly it in kind of basic tactical operations, right? Now you get to your airplane and you're like, I think a lot of people think that like once you complete flight school, like the studying's over, you're a pilot, you show up to your fleet squadron and you're ready to rock and roll and go off and drop bombs on people. But it's really that's like when you get to your fighter, that's the beginning of your career. You know what I mean? That's where you learn. They teach you how to fly the airplane, sure, but now you gotta learn how to work all the systems on it. You gotta work the radar warning receiver to know if someone's shooting at you. You gotta be able to work the radar. You gotta be able to employ the thing in an air-to-air environment. You gotta be able to employ it in an air-to-ground environment. You gotta know how to use your bombs. You gotta know how to use your gun, your rockets. So you get to learn all these weapon systems now, and still be able to fly this airplane. So I think to get back to your question about the training does a good job at teaching you to just fly and like stick skills and be a pilot. You don't become a tactical aviator until you're really good at doing that and employing your aircraft in a tactical environment. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So it does a good job at just kind of the basic monkey skills. So that way you can concentrate on employing that airplane tactically, and you don't have to worry about the basic monkey skills because it's just kind of like,
it's just happening.
Yeah, exactly. So at that point, that's just habit. Now you can focus on how do I employ this aircraft, with Marines on the ground, or how do I employ this aircraft in like a defensive combat scenario? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Defensive aircraft scenario. So that's kind of where that training just kind of instills those good habits that we talked about. So you can go on and do more advanced stuff.
Cool. So at what point in your jet training do you figure out what platform you're getting there? And is there another selection process, and are guys vying for one platform over another?
Yeah. So it's so I'll talk to kind of the Marine Corps, the way the Marine Corps does it, and then how the Navy does it. So you basically find out the day before you wing, like what you're gonna fly.
Oh, wow.
I mean it's Marine Corps specific. So you get what's called a dream sheet, right? Which they have them in every community in the Marine Corps. And it's kind of like all right, Marine, like what do you want to do? And you just from top to bottom, and you just write in your first through fifth or sixth choice. And so for us as Marines, we had the choice of Harriers East or West Coast. Only East Coast. And then you just rack and stack what you want. Me, like every Marine jet student at the time, just wanted to be an F-18 pilot. So I had like my choices were like F-18s Miramar, F-18s Beaufort, South Carolina, F-18s Japan, and then I had Harriers West, Harriers East, so Yuma, Cherry Point, and then Prowlers, which are only Cherry Point. And I remember, so you rack and stack first. That you turn that form in like 2 weeks before you wing, and then the day before you're winging, they bring you into like what's kind of a board, a mock board, and you just kind of sit down and they kind of go over how you did throughout jet school, and then they ask you straight up. They're like, so what do you want to fly, and why do you want to fly that? And I remember the head of my board was a Harrier guy, Pop Shipley. And he's sitting there. He's like, "So, what do you want to fly? Why do you want to fly, man?" And I was like, "Well, I want to fly F-18s." Like, off the boat, and he's like, he's like, Harriers operate off the boat." And I'm like, "Yeah, I guess that's true." And he's like, "I was like, I'd like to be a single seat guy." And he's like, "Hey, no matter what you fly in the Harrier, it's always going to be single seat." And I was like, "Okay." And then I was like, I want to support Marines." And he's like, "Oh, dude. Harriers, that's all they do, support Marines." And so I was kind of like reading the writing on the wall. This guy's like, "Dude, like I know you want Hornets, but guess what? You got you got Harriers." And then the XO brings you in like an hour later and tells you, he's like, "All right," he's like, "Grant, you're going to be a Harrier pilot in Yuma." And so that was kind of a shock. I was like, "Whoa!" Like didn't really see that coming. But they always say that the Harrier pilot was like the number 2 guy in his class because. In this case, like you are racked and stacked against other students that are graduating. I had the guy that was number 1 in my class. He's an F-35 MOTS instructor, but he
Nice.
He got Hornets, West Coast. I got Harriers, and then everyone that graduated below me didn't have the score, the NSS score like that was high enough to be a Harrier pilot. So. Because the Harrier pilot has that reputation the Harrier has a reputation for being like a difficult to fly aircraft. There's actually a grade point that you have to make in jet school to even be able to fly the Harrier. So me and Zach, me and the number 1 guy, we were the only guys that had above the Harrier cut. He was the number 1 guy, so he gets to choose where he wants to go. I was the number 2 guy. I don't really have a choice, and I was above the Harrier cut off, so I got Harriers, and then the 3 guys that graduated below me, they all were below the Harriers cut, so they all got Hornets. So you'll actually see guys will sandbag in flight school, like in jet school, because they're like, "Well, I don't want to be above the Harrier cut, so I want to fly Hornets." I don't know if it's still the same way now with the F-35, but yeah, I was kind of like, "God damn it," like I didn't, no one going through really wanted to fly Harriers, and it's not until you get to the Harrier that you realize you're like, "Oh, like this is actually the best kept secret." In the Marine Corps, because it's a badass airplane.
Yeah,
it's a lot of fun to fly. But when you're a young flight student, you don't really know that. You know what I mean? Like you have a few instructors going through jet school that are Harrier guys, and like they're usually pretty cool. But it's kind of a mixed bag of guys who are like they either loved it or they're like I hate it. And I think the guys that hated it because they didn't really fit well in the community. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Necessarily because they didn't like the jet, but it was more of a community thing. So. And we can talk to that later, but so that's kind of how the Marines select. Now the Navy, I kind of alluded to earlier, they have that weird track where they'll go E2 C2s or they'll go jets, after they finish like intermediate jet.
Mm-hmm.
So the guys who go E2 C2s, after they've been selected for that, their next phase. Airplanes.
Well,
did you lose me again?
Yeah. What would you say? You said their next phase, then you cut off.
Yeah, their next phase is to go fly. If they get selected for E2 C2, their next phase is to stay in the T-45 and go do carrier landings, and then from there they go fly the multi-engine airplane up in Corpus Christi. So they actually have to move up to Corpus and do like a 4-month phase of just flying the multi-engine to learn how to fly multi-engine aircraft. Since the E2 and the C2 are both twin turboprop airplanes, but they still have to learn how to land on the carrier. So they do that in the T-45, and then they go off and do multi-engine training up in Corpus. So it's kind of a hit for those guys, right? Because they start out flying the jet, and they get all excited about going to fly the jet, and then they get E2 C2s, and it's like, guess what? You're going to go fly multi-engine airplanes off carriers. You're not going to be a fighter pilot.
Later, nerd.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, peace out. But the guys who do go fly F-18s, they stay in T-45s, and they'll complete the program similar to the Marine jet pilots from there. So that's pretty much how the selection process works. Just like anything else, you choose where you want to go, and then the Marine Corps is like, "That's cool. Here's what you're really doing."
Yeah, for sure. That's exactly how it works.
Yeah.
So you found out you're going to Yuma. What squadron were you going to? And do you go to a training squadron, the RAG or whatever, out in Yuma, and then go to your actual squadron, or do you go straight into your actual squadron?
Yeah, so we do the RAG, or the FRS, the Fleet Replacement Squadron, is in Cherry Point for Harriers.
Okay.
So your first duty station after Kingsville for Harrier pilot is to go to Cherry Point. And that's where you learn to fly the Harrier, learn to hover it, which is a pain in the ass the first time you're doing it. First couple times you're doing it.
I lost you again.
How about now?
Yeah, I got you. You said it's a pain in the ass.
Yeah, so it's just it's a pain in the ass to learn how to hover it initially. It obviously takes a few rides in the sim, a few rides in the airplane to learn how to do it. But they have 2-seat versions of the Harrier actually in Cherry Point.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if you ever got to go through or get the support of WTI, but they actually give rides in the Harrier. They bring a couple 2-seat Harriers over there and give rides to guys that are going through WTI, that ground guys that have never been in the jets. That's pretty cool. But yeah, so you go to the RAG in Cherry Point, and then from there, that's about 9 months, and then they shoot you out to Yuma to join your fleet squadron from there. There's also a Marine aircraft group in Cherry Point as well that flies Harrier. So there's three Harrier squadrons in Cherry Point, and then there at the time 4 Harrier squadrons in Yuma. So when I went to Yuma, there were still 4 Harrier squadrons out there. You check into the group, and then the group assigns you to a squadron based on manpower needs.
How was your 9 months of training at Cherry Point? Was it just like refining tactics and stuff like that before you got to the fleet?
A little bit. It was mainly just how to fly the Harrier. Because the Harrier it's about 60% how to fly the Harrier and about 40% like tactics. The Harrier is obviously unique because it hovers. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? And it's got the thrust vectoring component to it, so you can actually, as opposed to a normal airplane, which just shoots the thrust right out the back that causes it to go forward. The Harrier's got 4 nozzles on it, right? It's got 2 like kind of right underneath the armpit of the wings, and then 2 right behind that. And you've got a lever inside the cockpit which allows those nozzles to rotate, which allows us, when you rotate them all the way down, and now the thrust is coming out the bottom of the airplane, that essentially gives you kind of that cushion that you can sit on that allows you to hover. Mm-hmm. So it's not binary. It's not either all the way out or all the way down. Like, you can operate the aircraft in different nozzle angles depending on like what you're doing. And there's really no tactical use to operating the nozzles in different angles. Like, when you're tactical, the nozzles are aft, so you're flying like a normal airplane. Really, where you're rotating the nozzles and like using that capability is for landing or taking off. So just kind of administrative portions of the flight. So that's kind of they say if you can drive a stick shift, you can fly a Harrier. You know what I mean? Because it's kind of like that mentality. Like, you got the throttle, but then you also got the stick right here. Yeah. You got the throttle, but then you have the nozzle lever right there. So like being able to kind of like go back and forth between the two and operate that, and like knowing where your nozzles are and what the nozzle angle is. And there's some tools inside the cockpit to kind of help you out with that. But that takes a large portion of like your brain power to be able to do that. And so a lot of what you learn in the RAG and the Harrier RAG is really just how to fly the airplane. And then they mix in some other stuff in there too, formation. They mix in some threat counter tactics, so how to operate if someone shoots a missile at you or is shooting a ADA at you. And then there's some bombing stuff too. So early work in dropping bombs, laser guided bombs, and JDAM and dumb bombs, things like that. I guess now they're doing a lot more T-pod work. So actually they actually like strap some targeting pods onto the airplane, and when students go out, they actually get to learn how to use the targeting pod. When I went through, there were no flights with the targeting pod. It was all either dumb bombing or dropping JDAM bomb on coordinate, or dropping LGB's bomb on coordinate, and then like your flight lead's the one lasing it in for you. And right before you leave the RAG, they kind of give you this like crash course in T-poddery, where they like put you in this like little simulator and like you kind of like operate the T-pod. And then your primary T-pod and sensor exposure is when you get to the fleet, and then you do a lot of operating with it there. Same thing with the radar. You learn that in the fleet, not so much in the RAG, which I guess they're doing a little bit more now in the RAG. But so yeah, there's not a lot of tactics in the RAG, but
I don't know if you can hear me, but I can't I can't hear you. Okay, there we go. I got you. Last thing I'll cut all that gap out. Last thing I heard you say was you don't learn a lot of tactics in the rag, and then it cut off.
Yeah. So yeah, you don't learn a lot of tactics. Did you get the part about the all the nozzle stuff?
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So you don't get a lot of the tactics in the rag because they're going to teach you that once you get to the fleet. You really just get kind of like a basic, rudimentary, building block level in the tactics, and then you advance on that as you get into the fleet.
Yeah. So the Harrier, I mean, the vertical takeoff for the Harrier is not something that's really used a lot. Vertical takeoff or landing, like I feel like it's. I mean, I remember as a kid even seeing it on TV, and that's like what everyone focuses on is how the Harrier can hover or take off vertically. And in real life, it's like that's never even used,
right?
Except for like landing on the LHD and stuff, which obviously is how you guys get around. But do you agree with the Marine Corps like forcing them to put a vertical takeoff into the F-35 and like continue on with that kind of flight?
Oof, that's a
very political question.
Yeah. So I think the intent behind like stowable aircraft, I mean, obviously it came about during the Cold War, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like we wanted the ability to operate out of like wooded areas or austere locations, right?
Mm-hmm.
And like have an aircraft that didn't need a runway basically, and still go up and perform casts or air interdiction, things like that. So that was kind of the concept behind it. And they're like, oh, we can put these on boats too, which is kind of where the LHD came around. So I don't think there's like nowadays, I would say nowadays there's not much use for stowable aircraft because the Marine Corps isn't willing to take the risk that's involved with operating like the way that the aircraft is intended to operate. I'm sure you've heard that Harriers are FOD machines, right?
Yeah.
Like we're that big intake, this big like a vacuum cleaner.
Mm-hmm.
Once you put any power on the engine, like it just starts sucking in like everything that's around it. And so, because of the FOD concerns, the Marine Corps has really done away with a lot of the like stowable operations that like legacy Harrier pilots did. The things like landing on roads, landing in like in the middle of a forest on like a cleared out area. And so because they're not willing to take the risk of that anymore, it's kind of like, well, why are they still pushing stowable?
Mm-hmm.
Especially because any aircraft, and like nowadays with like the F-35, I don't mean to bounce around on this, but like nowadays like the F-35, when a MEU rolls into theater, that combatant commander is going to grab that squadron of F-35s and pull them ashore, right? Because he's going to have better hands-on, and he's going to be like, these are my toys now, thanks.
Yeah.
And so the ship is really just a means to get him out to the combatant commander, at which point he's probably going to take that asset because he wants it. And so that leaves the question, well, why don't we just grab a tanker, fly those guys over to country, and just let them be land-based?
Yeah,
you know what I mean?
So them over there.
Yeah, but you know how the Marine Corps is. I mean, we get married to our doctrine,
mm-hmm.
and we want to continue to prove our existence and our ability to operate as a MEU. So if that's what the Marine Corps needs to continue to Marine Corps, then I mean that's what they're going to do. And really, it's just my opinion on like what I think about the having stowable aircraft. Like on our MEU, for example, I was a huge proponent of getting Harriers off the ship because, like you've seen it. Like how many layers of bureaucracy are there just to get guys from the ship to shore to do any kind of training event, or guys from ship to shore if they're going to go into combat operations. I mean, you got to brief 50 different people. You know what I mean? It's like I got 8 different bosses, Bob.
Yeah.
And like whereas if you're land based, like now you're just there. You've got one guy to worry about, and you go off and can do your job. You don't got to worry about
diplomatic clearances and all the other bullshit that comes with going ashore. Yeah.
Yeah, and so there's a lot less red tape to cut through if you just like dirt that and like base ashore, and you completely do away with like operating with the Navy, and now you can just kind of like there's like operating ashore still has its own amount of red tape. I got it, but like I feel like the Gator Navy, the amphibious Navy, and I apologize to whoever out there works on an LHD, but makes it a lot harder to operate in theater, operating off the ship, than it would just operating off land.
Oh, for sure.
Yeah. So in that case, like, then you wonder, like, well, why do we even need stowable aircraft? You know, if we're not gonna land on wooded areas, you know, we're not gonna land on highways and things like that. But you never really know where the future fight's gonna go. So I don't really, to answer your question, I don't really think that the Marine Corps should have invested in the B and the B model of the F-35. Maybe just kept it to the C model and just put them on carriers. And if you're gonna integrate with the Navy, might as well integrate with the big deck Navy, and just kind of do away with the Gator Navy altogether. But because we are married to that doctrine, and having Marines on ships, you know what I mean. That so we're going to continue to have stowable aircraft as long as we have that.
I agree with a lot of what you're saying, and I think a lot of guys on the ground side have the same kind of feeling. Like, why am I sitting out here with a company of Marines on one ship and all the support stuff floating around, waiting for a possible phone call, and you can't do any kind of real training. Like, you can't really do any. It's a really bad hindrance on the people that are stuck on ship. I always told guys, like, I like how the special purpose MAGTF works, where they push them forward. They're in Kuwait or whatever, like your deployment. Hey, you're going to Kuwait for 7 months or wherever it is you're going. And then from there, if something happens, we're going to push you over to that area to go do whatever it is you need to do. And, I think that we should do more of that and less of the MU. Like, maybe the MU gets split and you leave like one company that's on ship and they're out doing the bilateral exercises and stuff like that to maintain our political or our diplomatic work with other countries and shit. But the rest of the guys are either forward deployed to like Kuwait or somewhere like a staging area like that, or Djibouti or something like that. Or maybe they're just sitting 29 Palms and they can continue to train. Like, this is their deployment, and they're just on standby training rather than sitting on ship doing fucking nothing. You know, it's just, having been on ship twice, it's like, it's hard to justify like 90% of the people that are on ship being on ship. It's like, we're just sitting here just to sit here, you know?
Yeah. I like the concept that the MU brings as far as like force projection. You know what I mean? It's like, hey, at any given point, we got like, a shitload of hard chargers here, like ready to like kick in doors and like, beat your face in, right? Yeah. But at the same time, like, you could also argue that, like what you said, like, you keep guys forward base somewhere. Like, how long would it take to get a C-17 out there, load those dudes up on a couple C-17s, and like drop them in the theater somewhere? You know what I mean? Like, yeah.
Because everything on ship is difficult. Like, getting gear off ship's difficult. Getting people off ship's difficult. Like, when on my last MU I went on, when we sent the dudes into Syria, they didn't even bring their own gear. They used gear that was pre-staged.
Right? Yeah. Yeah. So it's like, why are we carrying all this shit around if we're just going to fall in on it somewhere else? And then I think a lot of times, you go down on the well deck and you're dealing with like the sailors that work down there on the well deck, and you have a goal, right? Your goal is to like get all your stuff off the ship, get ashore, and execute whatever operation you're doing, right? And so, but that guy that works down there on the well deck, he doesn't necessarily understand that. He just knows that, like, I got to get this LCAC out of the way before I can move this Connex box, and I got to do this and do that. And like, that's kind of where the process starts getting like, caught up, is that you've got, like you said, everything on the ship is just more difficult, and just trying to get your guys off the boat and ashore is just, I mean, that's a fight all in its.
Yeah.
Now you got to focus on your actual operation. You know what I mean? So it's, being on the ship definitely makes it difficult. If you're going to use the ship as like a force projection, this is kind of an idea that I'd come up with after our MU, was use the MU, get us out in the theater, and then it should be like a fire sale from there. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. Like, how many different groups were operating in theater when we showed up there? You know what I mean? Between all the special forces and just everyone that was out there, special forces MAGTF, like. The MU commander should roll in the theater and be like, all right, guys, like, I have assets for days. Who wants Harriers? You want Harriers? You got Harriers. Who wants skids? You want skids? Boom. Who wants a helo company of Marines? You do? Boom. They go over there. And just that ship should be a ghost town when it's floating around out there. And then give your give your subordinate commands essentially a 72-hour order that's like, hey, operate, with whatever support, whatever unit needs your support, but you got to brief me on a plan to be able to get back on the ship within 72 hours so we can roll to wherever in case, the Red Star cluster goes up and we got to go fight,
Yeah.
So by all means, go support what you're going to support, but have a plan where you can get all your forces back on board this ship so we can roll by X date. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. In case something happens. And that way, now you show up into the combatant commander's waters, and you sell all your stuff out, and now you're the MEU commander that supported all these different operations or all these different exercises because you just farmed out all your shit. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
and your guys get training, they get operational experience, and they're not just stuck there drilling, holes in the water in the NAG or down there in the Gulf of Aden.
Jeez.
Operating like what are we doing down here, man? And then you have an entire fleet of sailors and Marines who are just like what did we do this entire deployment? Yeah, we were force production and we were the force and readiness, but if there's actually fights going on in some of these areas that we were in, and we saw that there were fights going on, put us in the fight.
Yeah.
Let us get out there and do it, and we'll give you a plan for how we're going to get back to the ship. But let us go do something. That's why we're here.
Yeah. Let us get in the game. Now, the MEU, we always joked about it. The MEU is sixth string when you get out to CENTCOM, Fifth Fleet, Central, CENTCOM area. If there's even our recon guys that do nothing but train to board ships or board, oil platforms or do a, DA mission, something like that, even those guys aren't the first top 3 choices for a lot of missions that happen out there. Even shipboarding, they're going to have, they have special operations units out there that are going to do that. And then there's another backup special operations unit that'll cover down if they can't do it. And then if, those guys aren't available, they're like, okay, well, the ship can do it. And then it's up to the combatant commander or the ship commander or the commandant, who's the guy in charge of all 3 ships, Commodore.
Yeah.
It's up to him to decide if he wants to let his Navy guys do the shipboarding or the recon guys. And I remember, I don't know if it was on an RMU, because we went on it, for those that don't know, you and I went on the MEU together. I don't know if it was on RMU or a separate MEU, but the one time they got spun up to do a shipboarding mission, they stood them down and took the Navy's team off our ship and sent them out to go do the boarding mission. And it was just so yeah, you're right. It feels like a waste. I understand the force projection and keeping people on ship. If we were to float around, South China Sea and stuff like that to be that force projection for China. But when every MEU is pushing all their assets to CENTCOM, that's the end state. Hey, we're ending up in CENTCOM. No matter what, we'll be there for 3 months, and then we'll turn around and go back to home port. If we know we're going there, then why are, like you said, why are dudes staying on the ship? They should definitely be pushed forward into these Kuwait or Djibouti or places like that.
It takes a month and a half to get out there.
Yeah, for sure. And the other problem too is that I think one of our biggest problems is that there's no one on the ground to advocate for the Marines. I think there's a lot of Army commanders and Air Force people and stuff don't even understand the assets that are on the ship that are floating around. They may not even realize the ship's there, the upper echelon commands, but the guys that are doing the grunt work and the staff, that are making the actual decisions to brief the commander on, hey, this is what you ought to do. A lot of those people don't even know what a MEU is or what the capabilities are, I remember Jake Burton going ashore and talking to them about LAR, how we had LAVs on the ship, and they're like, "What's an LAV?" An Army colonel, what's an LAV? It's oh, it's like a striker kind of, but this, and that's having someone like him. He was the reason that we got our artillery dudes into Syria, because he went there and kind of explained what we had, what our capabilities were, and all that stuff, and helped feed that. But without someone like that there to do that, then no one even knows that you exist, and you end up wasting your fucking time, like I did, sitting on ship,
Dude,
rotting away.
I remember when Jake left. I was super jealous that he was getting off the ship, and he was gone for like 3 months, wasn't he?
Months. He was gone for months. Well, he didn't even come back. He stayed there. He was in Syria while we went back to the States.
Asshole.
I know.
Yeah, but no, yeah, it's got its pros, but I think the days of the MEU are a little bit dated with our current doctrine. and I would like to see some rewrites in the future to like the way that we operate. Less of a Cold War like total force mentality, and just more specialized, a little bit more specialized. Because like the MEU really should be like shock troops. You know what I mean?
For sure.
And it's like we should be like essentially a special force of its own that can operate. But like you said, there's already like 3 or 4 tiers above us of like highly specialized trained guys that are going to go out there, and they're really going to be the first ones that are going to be called. And I mean, we saw that on our MEU. Like some of the missions that we supported were for special force or for soft types.
Yeah. I think the MEU should have a program kind of like the 82nd Airborne, where it's like, hey, we're ready to respond to anywhere in the world within like 48 hours. We can have this many dudes there. But it's definitely has to come from a change in mentality of, because there's the same dude certifies all the MEUs on the West Coast. I don't know if he does it on the East Coast, but it's the same guy. It's one dude, and he just goes through and pushes how much PowerPoint, like, oh, we got to really work on this PowerPoint. And our MEU commanders and stuff and our MEU staff are more focused on mission planning and presenting the PowerPoint to the commander rather than the actual, like, it feels like to me as a enlisted dude that was, a staff sergeant, it felt like that was the focus for the MEU staff, was getting the PowerPoints correct rather than the execution. You got guys getting ready to go execute a raid, and they're still working on the fucking confirmation slides up in the, getting ready to brief the commander while dudes are gearing up to actually go do the raid. And it's just like, I don't know. There's a better way to do it. We gotta be hard on ourselves, like Marines generally are pretty good about being, and be honest with what we're actually bringing to the fight and what we're actually being asked to do. Because right now, from what I've seen, every once in a while you'll get little groups of dudes off the ship that get to go do something cool or getting to do something like legitimate, where the rest of the guys sit there and rot. Their weapons rust or their shit rust. Everything breaks down. Vehicles come off the ship not running and stuff because they've been sitting for so long. And it's tough.
It's funny how like different MEUs have completely different experiences. You know what I mean? Like, so the MEU that floated before ours, their Harrier squadron went up to Al-Udeid and flew missions for OIR for like MEU. They operated off of Libya for like 6 weeks. You know what I mean? They saw a lot of shit there off their ship.
Yeah, they dropped a ton of bombs.
Oh my God, they dropped. Like that to me was like the pinnacle of the Harrier career. Hearing tips, like stories on like what they were doing out there, because I mean they were slicking off like 8 JDAM per sortie, 8 to 10 JDAM per sortie, which is like, the classic Harrier story from especially from like a ground guy's perspective, is like you show up with 1 T-pod, 1 bomb, and then the bomb duds, or like we don't carry a lot of gas, and we're operating off the ship, so we can't carry a lot of weight. And that's kind of a legacy view of the Harrier. But once we got the digital eye turrets, we were able to put up to like 10 JDAM on a Harrier. And in a case like this, the MEU is great, right? Because there's nowhere really around Libya that we can operate close by. You park an LHD 30 miles off the coast. You load a Harrier down with 10 JDAM, and you send them off to do a strike mission. I mean, that's like that right there is like the pinnacle of like MEU, like carrier aviation. You know what I mean? Like that right there is like, you just validated the reason we have Stovall, right? The reason we have V-stall aircraft. And so I thought that was great. That was awesome PR campaign for V-stall aircraft. But I mean, that's like a once in a lifetime opportunity to get to do something. And then the MEU after we rolled through, like they sent Harriers ashore, and our Harrier stayed on the ship the whole time. So it's like
we had a window of where our Harrier squadron kind of got screwed a little bit. They didn't get as much action as like Tip, Captain Martinez.
We can talk offline about some of the things that were going on inside the Harrier deck, and fill you in. I don't want to put people on blast over the
hey, that's cool, man.
The internet.
You do you.
Yeah.
Let's go back to your flight training then. We got up to the point where you were getting ready to go to your first duty station, right? So you left flight school, you left the RAG, and now you're heading to the fleet. What was your first squadron? Or was it your only squadron?
VMFA-311.
Okay.
So I was in Marine Attack Squadron 311.
Okay.
So I showed up there in July of 2011. And
5 years. So you came in 2006, and finally in 2011, you're finally showing up to your first unit.
I'm going to show up and actually do something. Yeah, flight school is really just an extension of college. You're like a grown-up frat boy with a paycheck. So it's a lot of partying, a lot of fun, and flying. A little bit of flying airplanes, a lot of partying, a lot of fun. Now you show up to the fleet and it's like, holy crap, you're working 12-hour days, 5-6 days a week. You're given a ground job, so like for pilots, when we show up in a squadron, we're not just a pilot. We're an operations officer where we have to write the daily schedule, or you may work down in the maintenance department where you're a shop OIC, right? So now you actually have to put leadership, this concept of leadership that you were taught back in TBS, 5 years ago. Now you actually have to put some of that into practice because you have 40 Marines in a shop that you're now in charge of. So that on top of learning how to just be a good pilot, because you show up to the fleet with 80 hours in the airplane, thinking you're hot shit, but you're flying with guys who've got thousands of hours in this airplane. You know what I mean? And so you still have a long way to go to get to the point where you're able to even be deployed to operate your weapon system. So you show up to the fleet, you're given this ground job, and then you're also expected to be kind of a pilot on the side. You spend most of your day performing the ground job. There's a lot of things that kind of keep you from being able to fly all the time, as far as jet availability, maintenance practices, things like that. So you're not flying all the time. You're not even flying every day. Sometimes you may even go a couple weeks without flying. So it can get kind of dicey. If you're not, staying in the books or staying in the simulator and kind of keeping your stick and rudder skills active, because you're not going to fly the airplane every day once you get out there. It's kind of a different mentality from being a student where when they put you into a phase of flight, you kind of just go through that phase, and by the end of the phase, you're feeling pretty comfortable in the airplane and executing that skill. When you get to the fleet, I mean, you can go weeks without flying, and it really starts becoming kind of a safety issue at some point. But it's a different lifestyle once you get out there, because now you're actually doing a lot of work and a lot of work on the ground and actually trying to fly the airplane. So I started out in 311, VMFA-311. I started out as they just put me as the NATOPS officer. So I was in charge of keeping everyone's files and all their paperwork inside their jackets, their qualifications and all that stuff. I was only there for about 3 months, and then they moved me over to 211, which is actually that's where I first met Tip. And I was in 211 for 2 or 3 months also as I was a schedule writer. We went to EMV, Enhanced Mojave Viper. We were about to deploy to Afghanistan in 2012. You might remember 211 was they were the squadron that got attacked during the Bastion attacks. Yep. So I was going to deploy with that squadron. A few months before the deployment, the CO pulls me in, and I was kind of my bucket was definitely full. Let's put it that way. We're trying to put guys through some qualifications. So the new guys, when I was a new guy and I checked in there, they just didn't have the capacity to train me. Didn't fly for 3 months. Shot down the street the 211. Now 211's got this task of deploying in 6 months, and they got to get me, this new guy, spun up and trained on the aircraft to be able to go out and deploy. And by the way, I was a schedule writer for a very demanding operations officer, and a very demanding commanding officer. And my bucket was full. I had a lot of things going on. Bottom line, by the time they were ready to make the final roster of who was deploying, who the pilots were deploying, I was on the bottom rung and ended up not making the deployment. So they pretty much just shot me back over to 311. I was a little bit disheartened, you know what I mean? I essentially kicked out of a squadron. And so it's kind of a low point in my career, because I was just, I was like, shit, do I have the capacity to do this? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And now, sitting here looking back, I realized that the op tempo at that point was it was too much for a new guy. It was too much for me to really to comprehend. And what I looked at as a failure at that point of my career, now I can sit here and look back at it as like, well, really, it was this awesome opportunity for me to go back to 311. There were no deployments really on the horizon for 311 as a main squadron. They were kicking out a MEU, but like I wasn't going to go on the MEU, and so I had this awesome opportunity to just be a stateside pilot, to train, to get good at my ground job, not at the work out of deployment coming up, and all the other shit that goes along with getting ready to deploy. And it was a great opportunity for me to kind of get into my flow and really learn the basics of being a Harrier pilot with a squadron that didn't have the pressures of a deployment on the horizon. So what I saw at the time as a failure, it was a great opportunity to come back to 311 and really like train and become a better wingman in the squadron. And then I ended up going on 311's Afghanistan deployment in early 2013.
Okay. How was that? How was first off, how many flight hours do you think you were at in the Harrier before you felt like you got it? Like, okay, I fully understand this aircraft. Like, I'm not just flying it. I fully understand its capabilities and its limitations and stuff.
Probably about...
of course I'd lose you. What'd you say? Probably about what?
250 to 300 hours.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah. So when you first show up, you got about 80 hours in the airplane. So about 220 hours later, you're starting to feel pretty good, which is usually about when you shoot off onto your first deployment anyways. Usually, it varies, but generally guys about somewhere between the 250 to 300 hour mark is when they go off on their first deployment. And then you go operate, for example, my first deployment was Afghanistan in 2013. And then that's kind of a different scenario than flying stateside, right? Because you're a deployed unit, you're a forward deployed unit now, so you're at the head of the supply chain. You're the first one to get all the parts. You've got the best maintainers working for you. They're doing the same thing day in and day out. A lot of that kind of stateside administrative shit that you deal with is gone.
Yeah.
And now you just kind of fall in on like the deployed routine, right? So you're flying your ass off, man. Like you're flying every other day. Combat missions are anywhere from like at that time operating in Afghanistan, like 3 to 5 hours. You have a tanker overhead all the time, to give you gas to keep you airborne. And so you get really comfortable in the jet because you're just doing the same thing day in and day out, and you get like 250 hours in a deployment over like a 6-7 month period. And so you really get comfortable in the airplane. So you feel pretty comfortable leaving to go on the deployment, but then once you're on the deployment, I mean, you really feel like you just kind of strap that airplane on, you know what I mean? And like it becomes a part of you.
Yeah. Did you guys relieve 211 when you got to Afghanistan?
No, we relieved 231s. We were
Can you hear me?
Yep.
Okay.
Did you lose me again?
Yeah. So you said you relieved 231 and what?
231. Yeah, they were an East Coast squadron. So we relieved them. They chopped out early to relieve 211 after like all their airplanes got blown up. And then we took over for them. So we showed up in country and like 2 weeks of relief in place, and then they shot out, and then we were in charge at that point.
What was it like going on your first combat mission? Like this is it. This is real life. You've been training for years at this point for this moment.
Yeah.
And now you're gonna go out and do route scans.
So let me take a leak real quick.
Oh, go ahead.
All right. Yeah. And it's funny because that's a good tie into my first combat mission. Okay, so yeah, first combat mission. So before guys go out and fly combat missions, they do what's called left seat, right seat, which your first time flying in country after you land is you go up with a guy. So in the Harrier, there's obviously only a single seat, so it's really like left plane, right plane. You go up with a flight lead who is from the other squadron that you're relieving to do what's called a combat sustainment sortie, which is like there's areas that are kind of, I'm sure you've seen it, there's areas in Afghanistan that are kind of cut out around Bastion where you can go drop bombs, go shoot the gun, to kind of like keep your skills sharp. So you're operating in, these are the course rules in and out of the field. he leads you around, and then you go practice some close air support out in the range out there. And I remember I went up with Putty Howe, and he had a pretty, like, I'm pretty happy with my mustache, but this guy had this like awesome deployment mustache. I mean, it kind of looked like yours. Like, it was just like this like thick burly mustache. And I remember he took me up on this combat sustainment sortie, and like he was so just like I'm kind of like amped, right? Because it's my first time flying in a foreign, like, hostile country. And this dude's like, he's like, yeah, bro, like, we're gonna go up and do this. Like, the brief was like just so, the brief lasted like 5 minutes.
Yeah.
I was like, are you kidding me? Like, holy shit, like, what are we doing? We take off out of there, and I mean, we're taking 9 lines from so we go out and we're working with a FAC-A, a section of skids, and I mean, we're taking like crap, because I mean, these guys have been operating in country for the past 7 or 8 months, so they're like, I mean, they're just firing.
Yeah.
And that was actually the first time that I'd ever done a fixed wing lays for Hellfire. Like, we were doing all sorts of crazy shit on this burning dumpster, like, in the range, right off of Bastion. So that was like my first like look at flying around Afghanistan. And then my next flight after that was actually my first combat sortie. And so you go up and we're tasked with working. I think we're working with 3-4.
Okay. That's I was there with I wasn't with 3-4, but I was at FOB Jackson in Sangin in 2013.
Oh, were you? Okay, yeah.
That's where my advisor team was out of. Yeah.
Oh, no shit. Okay. Yeah. So first combat sortie, we go up, and we were somewhere. I don't even remember where we were. We were somewhere around like Kajaki Dam area, and then I think we hit the tank.
What's that? Hold on a second. You hit the tank and what?
We hit the tanker, and then we dropped down like the Musakela. And we're like somewhere like Musakela Wadi is where our second look was. And it's so funny. It's like Archer and I've talked about this too. Like, when you first show up there, you're like, you're spun up, right? You're flying combat sorties.
Here we go. I get to do it.
Yeah, you're like, I want to fucking kill everything, right? And you get out there, you got your T-pod down there. You're like, you're scanning, you're looking at things, and in reality, there's not really much going on. But you're like, you're amped for no reason. But you're like, you're scanning, you're reporting everything you see. You're like, I see a guy walking, and they're like, yeah, I got it. Like, people walk.
It's a thing.
JTAC's like, yeah, people walk around here. Like, it's okay. So you're just like, but at the same time, you're just excited to be there and like finally doing like what you've been,
exactly.
Like dropping bombs or shooting a gun. Like, you're just excited to be out there and like supporting the mission. And I remember we came off the tanker, we check in with the JTAC, we get our check in, and about this time, like, I realized I'm like, I gotta piss. You know what I mean? And in the Harrier, there's no tube. You have to piss in this little plastic bag with like these like crystals in it that turns into a sponge.
Yeah.
Kind of like set it off to the side. It's called a piddle pack.
Piddle pack.
And I remember we came off the tanker, and I'm already like, I gotta pee, but I don't like. I'm so amped up, and I want to like do my job. I don't want to take time from like operating my sensor and operating the T-pod to like take a piss. You know what I mean? So I'm like, I'll just hold it. Like, there's only an hour left in the sortie, and then we'll be back in Bastion. Well, between the adrenaline from just flying the combat sortie, already having to pee, or after our last X-cast or whatever, we land, and I'm like, my bladder is about to explode. I'm like, holy shit, I gotta pee so goddamn bad right now. So I pull off the runway. We're taxiing back. It's kind of a long taxi back. It's about 5 minutes. And I'm like, I'm digging back here. I get my piss bag out. Like, you gotta like, it's complicated peeing this thing, man. You gotta like, you gotta find it first because you're wearing all this. Like, your kind of sticks out a little bit. So I mean, you gotta like dig down there. You gotta find it. You gotta pull the piss bag out. And then you gotta aim into the piss bag, which is a feat all on its own because you can't even see what you're doing down there because you got all this kind of this flight gear sitting out in front of you. And so like you gotta like get certain ways, and like guys, everyone's got different techniques for how they pee in the jet. But long story short, as I'm taxiing back, which is like, not difficult when you're focused on it and like your hands are free. Now I'm like fumbling around with this piss.
Oh, hold on. What did you say? Hold on. You said you were fumbling around with a piss bag and what?
Yeah, fumbling around with the piss pack, taxiing the airplane. It's hotter than shit out there because it's the desert in Afghanistan, and so like get the canopy rolled back, you're peeing, you're taxiing. There's a lot going on, and you're also still kind of coming down from this like high, flying this combat mission, right?
Yeah.
So finish pissing, put the piss pack away, start doing the shutdown stuff in the jet as I'm taxiing in, get taxied into the line. Fucking Sergeant Hall was my plane captain, who I ended up being his OIC later on in the deployment when I got moved down into power line as the OIC. But he taxis me in, park the jet, shut it down, climb out, dump all your all the pubs and shit you're carrying with you, your iPad and everything, dump that out, jump down. There's all the Marines that run up to you, right? Because they're excited too, right? These are the guys that I love these guys because they're the guys that get your airplane ready to go fly. You know what I mean? And then they're the first ones to greet you when you come back from a combat sortie. So they're all high-fiving, shaking hands, congrats on your first combat mission, sir, and all that stuff. And so I'm out there with other Marines shaking hands and high-fiving and whatnot. Sergeant Hall comes up to me, or as he's walking up, he's like the plane captain. He's the one that's starting to assign guys to get the airplane turned and ready to go back out. And I remember he was he's like, hey, Castillo, take a look at those tires, so your dick's hanging out. Hey, Perez, I need you to come over here. And I was like, wait, what? I looked down and because I was doing a bunch of other stuff when I was taxiing in, taking this piss, I forgot to put my shit away after I was done pissing. And so I jumped out of the jet. I mean, I'm high-fiving, talking to all these Marines, and my junk's basically hanging out. And I was like, you got to be shitting me. I can't believe that I just got back from my first combat sortie and jumped out of the airplane with my dick out. And, I mean, it didn't.
What a classic story, though.
Slow clap. Good job, asshole. Way to show everyone on the flight line your dick,
Yeah, it happens.
I mean, there was already a call sign review board going on inside the ready room. I mean, I'm telling you, word travels fast when you do something like that. And I mean, that's the kind of thing that that you get a different call sign for. Luckily, I'd been Emilio at this point for so long that I just kept Emilio. And I mean, there were some good ones that were written up on the board, but I lucked out not getting a new call sign for something like that.
Yeah, it happens, Yeah, that would have been. I think a lot of people probably misunderstand what's actually happening over there too. I hate it that people think that aircraft and JTACs, whatever, are just blowing up everything. We're over here just destroying everything. When the reality is, most flights, especially all the ones I was working with, a lot of it comes down to route scans. Follow this guy around. Hey, this dude looks suspicious. Let's watch him for a couple minutes. It's a lot of voyeuristic, of watching people do things and be like, is that nefarious? Oh, is that a bomb or is he just digging in his field? Kind of deal. And
yeah.
I hate the stigma, I guess, if you want to call it that. That we're just slinging hellfires and bombs at, oh, look, a wedding party, kill it. It's just.
Yeah, exactly.
The targeting process, the whole process is very lengthy. One, just even finding a target, identifying a target and maintaining positive identification on them long enough for an asset like yourself to come on station and then get them talked onto the target. And then having the ROEs all line up. Well, hey, they're not in a compound. Hey, they're not next to a compound wall. Hey, they're not next to other people. And then we can finally drop. Obviously, there's exceptions to that rule. If there's a high value target or something like that, they flex a little bit on some stuff. But I don't know. I always hate when I hear people make it sound like we're just slinging bombs at everything and stuff. When a lot of it is just boring. Back and forth between the JTAC and the pilot, hey, what's that?
It's a lot of recon, a lot of reconnaissance.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, and what I think is cool is when you become familiar with an area and you have a squadron that's familiar with the area as well, and you guys have worked together so much that you start calling out areas. In Sangan, there was a spot where oh, hey, go, where the broccoli head is? Are you familiar with the broccoli head? And dudes would be like, yeah, I'm familiar, just because we've had them look at it so many times. We give them these nicknames. Do you know where the shark's tooth is? Kind of like that. And Yeah, I don't know. It's just I think you were probably surprised by how boring it was for you after a while, after like a few months of doing route scans and
Yeah, and it's like you're sitting up there. It's like month 3 or 4. You're sitting up there. You're scanning the same routes. You're looking for the same people. There's the occasional like operation that you support where you escort guys like in helicopters in, and like those are a little bit more exciting. But even then, once they hit the ground, there's not a lot going on, And then like you're sitting there, and it's hard to keep yourself in the fight. Like you're flying around. You got your mask is off, like you got your spitter out. And you're just kind of sitting there, like got it, like looking at stuff on your teapot. And then all of a sudden, someone comes up on the radio and declares a tick, and you're like, now you've got to like snap back
0 to 100. Here we go.
Yeah, exactly. And like, I mean, you want to talk about getting your heart rate up. When the JTAC comes on, they're like, hey, push back to. I don't remember who the DASC was, what their call sign was. But they're push back to Overlord for tasking, and you're like, what? And you push back, and they're like tick declared, and kill box, whatever. And you're like, holy shit, and like now you're like trying to like. Where is that? Like you're like what am I doing? You got to put your spitter away. You got to put your mask back on. Like it's
game time.
A lot can happen quickly, and you put this pressure on yourself to get there fast because like obviously like they're not going to declare a tick unless it's pretty serious. But usually. Yeah, it's that. Yeah, usually. Yeah, it's 98% of the time you're bored. 2% of the time you're like your hair's on fire and you're like holy shit.
Yeah, that's the basic combat experience. A whole lot of boredom punctuated with moments of like sheer terror of like, oh shit, here we go. For those that may not be familiar, a TIC it stands for Troops in Contact. It kind of morphed over the years. It became like initially it was like, hey, we're in contact, like I'm taking contact, and then by the time I did my second deployment there in 2013, it was a TIC meant I am taking contact, I'm pinned down, and I'm unable to maneuver. And if it as a JTAC, you knew like, hey, if I declare a TIC, I'm about to get like multiple sections on station. So it's like you have to be ready to receive, jets, rotors, freaking who knows, like intel birds might fly over to help out. Like you're
just like collapsing in on one area.
Yeah, that's good for us, and it's good for the troops on the ground. It's definitely it tests your readiness as a JTAC. Once you start getting multiple sections on in a real world scenario, you're like, oh shit, because no one else is on the radio talking to the jets. It's you, like you're the dude, and everyone's like asking you what the hell's going on and what's and it's it could be.
Would you know ahead of time like what aircraft were available, like what you might get? So
personally, what I would do, you always check the ATO, the air tasking order, and see what sections are on for that day. If we had a deliberate operation, like we knew we were going to go and try to hit this compound or do whatever, I would, as a JTAC, a couple days before, a week before, whenever we knew the operation was going on, request air, and then I might get like a section or 2 sections throughout the entire expected engagement window. But I also would know what else is on station at that time, and I would brief all my guys. Most of them probably didn't know. Some of them wrote it down, but I would brief everybody like, "Hey, we're gonna have so and so and so and so dedicated on purple or not purple, but on like orange, whatever the color of the TAD net is. We're gonna have these assets on this net. However, there's also these assets that are going to be flying around the area. So if something happens, we can call them in. And then another thing we would brief is what medevac assets are available, ground and air, and expected times, our flight times and stuff like that. So you find out as a JTAC. And for me, it was different because I was a advisor team JTAC, so I didn't have like an air officer and all the other dudes there that could kind of do it. I had to like figure it out. If I didn't know how to request air or whatever, I had to do it on my own and then turn around and try to brief my own commander, my team leader and stuff on what we had going on and what capabilities we had. And then turn around and brief that to the Afghans that we would go out and do like a mission with if we needed to let them know. We'd give them a heads up like, hey, we're going to have this aircraft come in. So just so you know, because they would shoot mortars off randomly or whatever. So You're always trying to think of like safety of flight for the aircraft, or you're supposed to be. I mean, I was always trying to maintain safety of flight for the aircraft and stuff like that. Sometimes pilots don't like it though, because they don't want to get put in a box, and it's like, dude, like I'm shooting shit over here. Like, what are the chances that you're gonna hit something? I got it, pretty slim, but I need you to stay west of this area for the next 20 minutes or whatever, because trying to control the Afghans and how they employ their own weapons is just not. I mean, you give them like a general idea of what you would like to see, and then they just kind of do whatever they want,
Yeah, like I know exactly what you're talking about, because we when we were over there were several times we got put over into a keypad because they were going to shoot HIMARS. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And at the time, like HIMARS were like kind of lower on the rung of collateral damage, and I mean, it took I think general approval in 2013 when we were there to get any kind of air delivered munitions, So
yeah, well,
I mean,
we had
some shit going.
We had battalion level approval. 3-4 had, so because we were in 3-4's battle space, they had final approval for our advisor team for any kind of work that we did. They were very stringent on anything, honestly. I got pinned down on a rooftop one time where I was literally laying behind one sandbag with rounds flying probably inches from my face. And I had identified the shooter. I had a Harrier on station. I had the Soldier ISR, so the little handheld eyepiece, and I'm looking through the eyepiece so I could see what the T-pod, the targeting pod from the aircraft could see. Yeah. Identified where the shooter was, and working a game plan 9 line to have the Harrier come around and drop a bomb on this dude or do a gun run. And 3-4 battalion commander kept denying the mission. Because he was next to a compound wall, because the ROEs at the time said you couldn't do any damage to any structures unless a tick had been declared. And I wasn't quick on declaring a tick. I was someone that was like, you know what, I'm not really in like I'm pinned down right now, but I'm the only one that's pinned down. And what are the odds that I'm going to sit here and be pinned down for a while? I mean, I was scared as shit. I thought I was going to get shot in the face. Yeah, it was super sketchy. It was probably one of the scariest things that's ever happened to me in my life. But I still didn't think that it justified calling in a tick. And had I done that, I could have gotten the control off real easy. But yeah, so anyway, shit like that, he would deny. And what we would do is then turn around and be like, all right, well, the 3-4's battalion commander is denying this request. Let's shoot some Afghan mortars. So then we would talk to the Afghans, be like, hey, we need you to shoot your mortars this way. And then we'd start working with them. So we would provide our own fire support because, I mean, that happened multiple times. One time I almost got shot in the face again on a different one. And me and my corpsman jumped off this platform. We were scoping out these dudes that were across the way. And we jumped off this platform as we started getting shot at. And these dudes were standing and fighting, which after the Taliban dudes didn't normally do. They were fighting they were probably 500 meters in front of us in a tree line, and we had armored vehicles, not just ours, but we had this what they call it, the mobile strike force, I think is what they called it. And those dudes were pushing towards the Taliban dudes in the tree line with a 50 cal and a Mark 19, kind of like you'd have on an AAV, and these dudes in the tree line are shooting RPGs back at them and stuff like that and push the armored vehicle back. This is a sustained engagement. I couldn't believe that we were standing and fighting with these dudes. And we're shooting at them with, obviously, my advisor team, we had M4s and stuff like that. Nothing crazy. I think we had some 50 cals on our guns or on our trucks. And then the Afghans were shooting Dishkas at them, shooting RPGs at them. Or not RPG, excuse me. SPG-9, the recoilless rifle and stuff. But they were still staying and fighting. And I had a Tornado on, a British Tornado on, and he had the Brimstone, which is their equivalent of the Hellfire. And same deal, got him talked on, got the target, everything's going. And 3-4's battalion commander denied the mission because he wanted...
Are you serious?
Yeah, dude. Came back later. So I got back to the FOB, and within 5 or 10 minutes of getting to the FOB, I see him. The battalion commander comes up to me. He's like, hey, you were the JTAC out there, right? And I'm like... Yes, sir. And he's like, man, you're about 5 minutes away from having that mission approved. And I'm like, in my head, I'm like, dude, go fuck yourself, bro. I almost got shot in the face out there, and we're doing all this stuff. And you went up, he's just like, well, we just want to make sure that the Afghans are using all their weapon systems before we utilize any of ours. You know, we're trying to make it an Afghan fight. And I'm like, I get it, but we were 100% using every weapon system against these dudes. Like, that's the time that we should have had a Hellfire on that tree line or a Brimstone on that tree line. But yeah, man, it's tough. It's tough when you're working in somebody else's AO and you rely on them on one dude to make the call. You know, even though we were well within our ROE, you know, restrictions and stuff like that, he still has the ability to be like, no, I don't think it's right, you know, and
like it's super frustrating for us as pilots too, because you know, like we, you know, like I don't know very many pilots that are just out there like I just want to kill something, you know what I mean? Like we're there to support the Marines, and we're there to like support you guys. And so when we're flying around and we're overhead and we know that there's Marines on the ground and they're taking fire and they're getting shot at, and we cannot get approval to employ our ordnance, it's just, I mean, you're like, it's like the most frustrating thing ever, you know. And like if all you can do is like fly low and do a show of force, I mean that's something. But I mean, like those by that point in the war, like I mean, like those dudes were so used to seeing airplanes flying low and kicking off flares that I mean they knew what our ROE was. They knew that 100%. They stood next to the wall, you know, that they weren't going to eat a GBU-54, and like it was frustrating. And I get the political side of it. Like, hey, we want the Afghans to learn how to fight in their own backyard. But I mean, if we're gonna have Marines on the ground,
hold on, start over again. You said if we're gonna have Marines on the ground, what'd you say after that?
Yeah, if we're gonna have Marines on the ground, like we need to utilize the full capabilities of our arsenal to protect those guys. You know what I mean? And I get like wanting to use, like, if it's like a couple guys, if it's like two guys in a tree line, like, you know, doing their standard like hit and run tactics, like, okay, let the Afghans deal with that, you know. But if they're trying to go toe to toe with you and they're not backing down, like, you know, that's when you got to escalate and I think bring in the bombs. And it's like, okay, sorry, we may hit a wall or we may cause damage on this structure, but I'm not going to lose a Marine over this. You know what I mean? Like, no Marine life is worth what's going on over there now or in 2013, you know?
Yeah, for sure. It was 13 was a weird time because we were supposed to be the last. I don't think anybody came in after us, but we were the last A&A advisor team to go into Sangin. Yeah. So when we left, it was like, hey man, you guys got it. Like, good luck. You know, 3-4 was still there. And I think 3-4 used that opportunity to finally get their guys outside of the wire, because the entire deployment, they were basically having to stay inside the wire, at least in Sangin. I don't know what was going on up in Musakela or Kajaki, but in Sangin, the company that was there was staying inside the wire because it was supposed to be an Afghan fight. So we would have them, sometimes they'd be spun up and ready to go as a QRF, like, but they would still sit on the base while our advisor team was going out and actually doing the missions with these guys. And it wasn't just ordnance either. It was support, as in like medevacs. I remember we had I think it was an Afghan police chief, had been shot in the stomach, and our corpsmen were sitting there working on him, and I'm sitting there talking to these guys, like trying to get a medevac spun up for these guys or for this dude, and they denied him. They're like, no, dude, like, unless we think he's going to die in like the next hour, he needs to get in an Afghan Humvee and they need to drive him to Lashkar Gah to the medical facility, their own medical facilities. Like, we're not going to fly in a medevac bird. And I'm like, dude, this dude's got shot in the stomach and you're wanting him to drive like an hour and a half in the back of a Humvee ambulance through, like, you know, Sangin and like all these, you know. I was like, God, dude, like, it's tough, man. It's tough when you're
fighting with one hand behind your back.
For sure. You know? And it's tough for us as advisors to be like, hey man, we can't support that. Like, I know this dude's important in the village. I know he's a police chief or whatever, but sorry, like, they're saying we can't do it. You're going to have to medevac him. And it's like they look at you like, what are you here for? Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's tough for sure.
This is their ability to train to that level of being able to support. But I mean, at the end of the day, man, like, they're not us.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, they don't have the same equipment we have. They don't have the same training that we have. And so if we have to be a little bit heavy-handed, I mean, it's like, you don't want a guy to die.
For sure. Know? Yeah. And, you know, we we hate on the Afghans and stuff like that. We're like, oh man, they suck. Like they're not very proficient. They're not very good at this. Tactics suck. And I'm like, well, you're also looking through the lens. You're in a fighting force that's been perfecting it for over 200 years. Whereas, we're just building up this group of people. So to expect them to be anywhere near as proficient as our guys, is just ridiculous. It's just crazy. Plus their understanding of technology is just, it's lacking, for lack of better words, I guess.
If they need our help, then we should. If we're going to be dedicated to help them, we should jump through our ass to give them that help, just so they know that we're, we want to turn the fight over to them, but we also want to show that we're a good,
ensure that they can sustain themselves.
Yeah.
Once we left, dude, fucking Sangin fell almost immediately. As soon as the last Americans pulled out of there, they took over the bazaar. Like the bazaar became a ghost town. It used to be we would drive through it, it'd be so full of people and stuff. And then ISIS and the ISIS fighters and the Taliban dudes that were still there took it over and just started killing everybody, put car bombs and IEDs everywhere. It just ruined that. I don't know.
Sad, man.
Yeah,
that Kentucky Dam area was beautiful.
I never made it up there. Yeah, I heard it's pretty wild up there in the mountains and stuff and up by the dam. And they would get into a lot of fights out there.
Yeah.
Yeah. I will say, though, shout out to the 3-4 Air Shop. Taco, he's a Harrier pilot. Yeah. Taco was the Arrow. Good people. I had Barnyard and Alcala. Those are the two JTACs that I worked with the most. They were all good. Those dudes were all, I think they were fighting for me inside the command center for approval for some of these missions. It's just the battalion staff and stuff wouldn't have it. But they did. Taco was really good about supporting me with stuff I needed because he was like, dude, you're the only show in town. Nothing else is going on. So, good.
Yeah, Taco was great to work with, man. He actually, I don't know if you knew this, but he came right before I got out of the Marine Corps. He came back to 311 and was the XO there.
Oh, really?
We communicate a lot on emails, go back and forth on what's the best way that 311 can support them, and I would try to email him and pull sensor tasking early if I knew that I was going to be working in his airspace.
Mm-hmm.
And 311 and 3-4 went through ITX together. Obviously we're going to deploy together, so we went and trained together, and that was a great opportunity for me to actually meet some of his JTACs also, and really sharp dudes. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I was really impressed with he was him and his facs were training these young JTACs and whatnot, but I mean these guys were this is kind of my first experience working with a sergeant on the radio,
mm-hmm.
A guy that has no aviation experience whatsoever, but he understood all this information that was that we were talking about and all these tactics, and I was like, wow, that was my first real exposure working with these tactical enlisted dudes and
the dirty enlisted,
the enlisted bros.
You can.
No, I was really impressed with them, man. They were professional, they were sharp, and
I know the two guys that I knew that were with 3-4 was Barnyard and Alcala, and Alcala had done time with 1st Anglico, so I think that was his first duty station. So he grew up at 1st Anglico, and then he went to 11th Marines and did that deployment. And then Barnyard had been at 11th Marines, and he had deployed with 3-5 to Sangin during their really shitty tour and stuff like that. So both of those guys had a pretty good amount of experience with air and stuff. Right. They were pretty savvy dudes and good people for me to lean on when I could and work with. There was something else I was going to say. There was something I was going to say Taco got to come out one time on a mission, and I think it was just a mounted patrol, a convoy kind of deal. And he came, I remember him coming back and being holy shit, dude. This is the first time this was the first time he'd been out on the ground, driving through the villages, and was I don't understand how you make one, you can tell the difference between anything out here because it's all mud huts and shit. And so I guess I was wondering is there any point in time while you guys are deployed that you have an opportunity to actually go out into the country on the ground rather than flying just to see what it's like?
It's entirely situationally dependent. And I remember there was a British unit just south of us, and what was that town or that fob, Shorecat or something like that?
Oh, Shorebach.
It was just south of Bastion, about 10 miles, 10, 15 miles, something like that. anyway, there were some British guys there, and I communicate regularly with them for tasking purposes and things like that. And one of the guys, their head aero was like, "Hey man, like we have like daily supply runs that go to and from Leatherneck. Like you should hop on one and come down here and check out the fob."
Sure.
And I was all for it, I was like, "Hell yeah, that sounds awesome." I got to put my flak jacket together because I'm pretty sure it was just in pieces in my bag.
Yeah.
I got to figure out how to put that thing on, but pilot life. But I was like, yeah, I'd love to do that. And so I ran it up the flagpole, ran it for my CO, and he was like, "Hell no, no, you're not going out there." And I was like, "What? Like we fly? Like how is it any different than what we do every single day? I'm going to be in an airplane. I'm going to take off inside the wire. I'm going to fly around outside the wire, and then I'm going to land again inside the wire. Like I'm not doing anything really outside the norm, except that I'm going to go to this British fob and actually get to take off my flight suit and sunbathe out on the roof of their
kick it with the
huts
boys.
Yeah. What's that?
I said kick it with the boys.
Yeah, exactly. I was just going to go hang out, and he was not.
He
wasn't about. Yeah, he's like, nope. He's like, I'm not going to be the CO that lets a pilot go down there and then gets like mortared.
Oh yeah.
And so
for sure.
Whatever. Like we got mortared on Bastion as it was. So
yeah.
I don't think it would have been any different, but I get where he's coming from as far as like the operational risk.
Yeah, for sure. It's funny. Yeah, the air bases are magnets for any kind of IDF. So mortars, the Chinese rockets. You start getting used to them though. You're like, that's not even close to me. Like I don't even care. I'm not getting to the bunker.
Yeah, like or you sleep through them. Or
yeah. Back to
you don't hear the alarm go off.
Back to 3-4 and at EMV. So I was actually out there doing my advisor training. That was our Pinnacle advisor training as well, which was. For me,
yeah, you were out there with John, right? John Isley?
Yeah. So that's what I was going to say.
Yeah.
So for me, it sucked out there as an advisor because as a JTAC on an advisor team, there's no JTAC training. There's no, like, it's kind of on you to do your own thing, and it's kind of on you to reach back to your unit and try to get controls and stuff just to get some practice.
Right.
So we were out there doing our advising stuff like that. But that's where we actually first met, and it took me until we came back until we were on the MEU together. I was like, man, I know this guy from somewhere. Really? And that's when so John Isley, who was also in the Marines, he was on my advisor team as I think he was the logo or assistant logo on there. He knew you from back in the day, and he introduced me to you, and me and you sat there. You were like, yeah, I'm a newer pilot. Like this is going to be my first deployment. And you and I remember sitting there bullshitting over beers in the Warrior Club or whatever, talking tactics and stuff. It was cool. Your squadron bought the entire bar a keg. Like someone in the squadron paid for a keg, and you guys were up there just pumping beers for everybody. Yeah.
We pilots with too much money and too much free time.
It was a good time. The funny part was that you guys were super cool and like, hey, what's up? We're sitting there bullshitting and talking about stuff we'd been doing. And before I had talked to you, there were some Cobra guys standing over there in their little circle, all the cool guys with their little leather jackets on. And I was like, hey, what's up, dudes? I was like, what's up? I'm Justin, or I'm Sergeant Kramer, Cosmo. I'm one of the JTACs going out with the advisor team. And they're just like, yeah? Like, what? Like, kind of like, why are you talking to us? And I'm like, all right, well, go fuck yourself, And then I left. And then you guys came in, and I'm like, these dudes are way cooler than those asshole Cobra guys.
Yeah, skid guys, like, I don't know, they got to stick up their ass or something.
Well, like we said at the very beginning.
Like we said in the beginning, like not all of them, right? Like that's that may have just been kind of a douchier group, but
they're just hard on each other, man. They're just naturally assholes, which isn't a bad thing,
Man. Like I've met my fair share of douchey Harrier pilots too, and douchey F-18 guys, and I think what you're gonna find is that every community has a certain percentage of like just kind of weirdos or nerds, and like these guys weren't really socially accepted growing up. They became pilots, and now they're just not really socially accepted doing that either. Before I became a WTI, like I didn't really want to do it because like a lot of the WTIs that I'd known up until that point in my career had been like these guys that were just like, it's like they wanted to prove something, you know what I mean? They wanted to prove that, like, I don't know, they were cool or whatever.
Like,
but
I
they
am
weren't
the best pilot here. I am the WTI.
exactly like these guys had watched Top Gun like one too many times, and they weren't like in the Harrier community, especially. Like a lot of the WTIs didn't have the greatest reputation. Like they were kind of assholes. They were like a little arrogant. They were not cool to new guys, things like that. And so when I got told that I was going to the WTI, like I made it a point to like not be that guy. You know what I mean? Like I was like, okay, like I have had a few WTIs in my career up until that point where they were cool dudes. You know what I mean? Like because they wore the patch, they didn't let that go to their head. They didn't. They were just one of the bros in the squadron. They just happened to be the guy that writes your training plan.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And so I tried to style my like when I became a WTI, I tried to style that based on those guys. And I mean, the skid community is the same way. Like the skid community's got guys like Archer. You know what I mean? It's got guys like Matt Palumbo.
Mm-hmm.
So it's got these, still has these like great dudes.
Oh, for sure.
That are in the community. You know what I mean? But it seems like the ones that we always remember are the ones that are like that circle you're talking about, the Warrior Club, that were just kind of like keeping in their own little tight knit circle.
Yeah, I like to blow those guys shit as much as I can. It is what it is. However, I will say the great thing over in Afghanistan was with skids. If like your command wouldn't give approval for a mission or something like that, it's very easy for them to identify their own targets because they're flying right there and claim and a lot of times rightfully so self-defense because maybe they're going to take a shot at them or something like that.
True, yeah.
So skids are great having on. I loved having skids on station, and the enemy did not like it. If they could hear the rotors, they would keep them away. They would keep away because they knew that's where the Hellfires came from. And there was one of the Afghans was telling me that the locals, how we tell kids like, oh, the boogeyman, like the boogeyman will get you if you're not good or whatever, like people tell their kids that. Over there, they're telling their kid like the boogeyman was the thing that blew people up. Like you'll get a Hellfire basically if you're not good kind of deal. Yeah. We were the boogeyman. Like the Hellfire was the boogeyman. I was like, that's super fucked up. Like I can't believe that's the kind of.
That's crazy.
Yeah. All right, man.
But I mean, the skid guys, man, like they do good work
for sure.
I know you know that. I mean, those guys are professional cast players, and there's always going to be that rift between like jet guys and skid guys, especially Harrier guys and skid guys because we deploy in the MEU together. I feel like the F-18s are kind of in their own little world because they never go on the MEU. You know what I mean? But like
it is a weird world for them.
Harriers and skids are always going to like come to a head, and like we're always going to like have some friction there as like who's the better cast platform. It's obviously the Harrier, but I mean like we'll let the skid guys like have the thing. But no, man, I always loved working with those guys because I knew that when a skid checked in on station, it was going to be a professional cast player. And you always, as a Harrier guy, especially like me, like I don't know about other guys, but I know that like me and like my young guys when I became the WTI, it was always hey man, if you're operating with other cast platforms out there, especially skid guys, like be on the top of your game because you don't want to show your ass to those guys. You know what I mean? Like you don't want to look like a clown in front of the skids because that's just going to be more ammo they can take back to the ready room and be like, oh, what the fuck are you?
Yeah. For sure. I wish more. That's one thing I really miss about the military is that you are striving for a level to not show your ass. I don't know. I feel like everybody, the whole, the stupid phrase "steel sharpens steel" kind of thing is true because, like you said, you don't want to show your ass. You don't want to be the weak link. And it's an extremely serious job. It's a very serious profession and serious things can happen. And we have a lot of good times and stuff, but when it's game time, when it's, you're downrange and it's game time, like you don't want to be the guy that shows your ass. So we are definitely, I don't know, people within that community and the combat arms community and the cast community for sure are our own worst critics. And I think we're hardest on ourselves, which is, it has to be that way because if you're not hard on yourself, then you're probably not doing it right and you're forgetting, something that's going to get somebody killed that's not supposed to get killed.
Absolutely, yeah. And it's funny because like when we're a lot of times we compare being like cast players to being pilots or whatever you're doing. You compare that to being like an athlete. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. And so like a lot of the times like you'll hear the phrase, well, you need to be an athlete about it. You know what I mean? So it's like it's kind of that competitive edge, it keeps you, like you said, keeps you on your game, keeps you sharp. And no, I think it's good that in the military we kind of breed that competitive edge. You know what I mean? Because yeah, we're all on the same team, but like you don't want to be that weak link to your teammates. So I get it.
Yeah, 100%. Well, dude, we're at almost 2.5 hours, so I think I'm gonna cut it here. You're gonna have to come back on because I have like a bunch of other topics. We didn't even get about you getting out or anything like that, or what you're doing now. But I want to keep it kind of short because I found that a lot of people don't listen to the 4-hour ones all the way through, and I'd hate for anyone to miss out on some good info. So I definitely want to have you come back on in the future. But if you have any if you want to throw out your social media here, you can, if you want to, or if there's any kind of organizations or companies that you want to kind of, give a shout out to, now's your time.
Yeah. I'm only on Instagram right now. I deactivated my Facebook because, it's a little bit too much, but yeah, it's G as in golf _ Tyler 1283 Instagram. It's mainly food pictures, so if that's your thing, that's pretty much what I got. And yeah, I got a couple of other ideas for you later on for podcasts for some of the guys that we've talked about here that I think would jive up pretty well with what you got going on. And I appreciate you having me on your show.
For sure, man. I've already talked to Martinez. He's going to come when he gets done with law school, which is awesome. This dude, a lot of people don't know who he is. He's a great dude, solid dude, Harrier pilot. Now he's out, and he decided to get out as a major. He got to go on that deployment where they're dropping bombs like at a cyclic rate, and now he's a lawyer. Yeah. Now he's finishing up law school at Stanford. He
is hands down one of the smartest guys I know. Like easily the smartest Harrier pilot I think in the past 20 years, but. Just in general, he's a smart dude, great guy also.
Yeah.
So I got some cool stories about Tip as well that we can talk about offline.
Sick, dude. Well, yeah, appreciate you coming on, man, and telling the story. And I think a lot of guys, especially guys that are kind of trying to decide what they want to do in the military, will find this probably very beneficial. Learning more about flight school and stuff like that. So for the listeners, my Instagram is jkramergraphics. Also former Action Guys. I have both of those Instagram pages. And my website's jkramergraphics.com. So make sure to check that out and have a good day.